Arks of Omen. The Lion. Long slumbered the lion in tragedy's wake. Far wandered his sleeping mind, following strange paths through the arboreal mists of a shattered world, even as slowly, so slowly, his broken body healed. Monstrous and otherworldly were the things he hunted through shadowed ghost glades, while beyond his crypt the stars wheeled and the sands of time whirled upon hurricane winds. The lion slept on. Darkness deepened between the stars. Tragedy piled upon tragedy. Hope became the opiate of fools, and even such heroes as Lion El Johnson dwindled into whispered myth. Then light. Then wakefulness. Then striding tall, purposeful, armoured, blade in hand, cowled and watchful, the mind dislocated from its old truths, even as the body burned with fresh vitality, and the hearts beat with the cold resolution of vengeance. Parting veils of silvered shadow through the ghosts of Caliban's slain forest, the lion walked abroad in the galaxy once more, for loyalty, for the hunt, for the Emperor. The story so far. In the closing moments of the 41st millennium, Abaddon the Despoiler looked upon the war-torn galaxy and saw the threat of mutual annihilation looming. He had not fought his long war for 10,000 years, only to see his triumph poisoned by the forced patronage of the dark gods, or the galaxy ripped apart by so many warring factions that their only victors were entropy and nihilism. Abaddon did not believe that marshalling his armies would be enough by itself. He sought some device or weapon of such irresistible puissance that it would afford him the strategic and martial advantage he needed to launch a final and decisive conquest of the galaxy entire. Abaddon's unlikely ally in this quest was the demon demigod Vashtorr the Arkifane. Already the master of the soul forges, this malevolent entity sought apotheosis to true chaos godhood. He believed that by aiding Abaddon to final victory, he could reap sufficient power to achieve this aim. Vashtorr knew where a truly mighty weapon had been sealed away during a primordial age, and he knew how to assemble the key that would unlock its vault. The Arkifane offered Abaddon this knowledge and fashioned the terrifying Arks of Omen to scour the galaxy for the fragments of the key, as well as the 3 potent artifacts of power that would bring it to life. Combining their vast and terrible armies and gathering mighty Baal fleets to accompany the Arks to war, Abaddon and Vashtorr unleashed a nightmarish new crusade across the stars. Countless battles raged from one end of the galaxy to the other, for an ancient cataclysm had scattered the key fragments far and wide. Baal fleets descended upon human and Xenos worlds alike, fortified fastnesses and unsuspecting backwaters where the psychic spore of the fragments led. The Arks of Omen struck. As the key fragments were amassed, so Vashtorr incorporated them into the engine of terrible power that was his key. Day by day, this abomination took shape deep within the tainted region of space known as the Somnian Stars. Yet even as the Arkifane's labors neared completion, still there were those powers in the galaxy that opposed his will. Eldari war hosts, oath bands of the Leagues of Votan, rampaging orc hordes, Necron legions, and others besides still resisted the Arks of Omen, or even launched attacks upon them in revenge for the carnage they had wrought. Meanwhile, the Emperor's own angels of death gathered to strike at the key itself. Collation Report 34/U/Beta. Authorization: Epistolary Antinous. Report commences. Lord Dante, I present my summation of the oracular and investigatory effort undertaken at your command by the Librarius. I command the Battle Brothers who aided us in this quest, and honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice in its name. Autologs, prophetic analyses, supporting combat accounts et al. Can be found in the appended data files. As you know, Lord, we first detected our target's unique psychic spore during the boarding of the Ark of Omen, Night Terror. There we found only the hacked and blasted bodies of the Ark's heretic masters and crew, as well as traces of anomalous and withered plant life. It was from prognostication and empiro-energetic analysis of these samples that we picked up a trail to be followed. Even as the Arks of Omen have raided across the galaxy, so our strike forces have pursued that trail as it leapt between the stars. It has tested our Librarius to its limits to track these manifestations, especially amidst the challenges of the Imperium Nihilus. It seems probable we have identified only a handful of its full appearances, yet this has been enough. In each case, the signature meshes with the coming of a singular being to whom many names have been given. On Catterick, they called it the Unforgiving Night. In the Karnath Expanse, they named it Tyranny's End. Beast Slayer on Mados 5, the Cowled Giant on Lusitane Beta. On the Shattered Road, the Pilgrims even dared name it the Emperor Incarnate. Many eyewitnesses stray into lurid mythologizing. Certain similarities persist, however. He is a warrior, larger than any battle brother, but clad in ornate power armor. He goes hooded and cloaked. He bears a mighty sword and glowing golden shield. He steps from the shadow roads of a dark forest that is not truly there. His hatred of chaos in all its forms is absolute. His slaying of monsters and tyrants swift and thorough. Sometimes he fights alone, sometimes accompanied by black-armored Adeptus Astartes, whose natures remain mysterious. What picked and vid capture we have recovered corroborates these accounts. It is all included in the data files, and is, in places, truly remarkable. Along with empiric divining, analytic augury, and macrospectral sampling, it has helped us in our pursuit to close the gap. I will not speculate on the nature of this being, my lord, for you are as able as I to draw the obvious, startling conclusion as to his possible nature and identity. Rather, in data file 001/Primus/H67P, I simply provide the autoprophetic coordinates where the Librarius believe this being can be intercepted. Notatum secundus. Attached to this report is subfile W4D87/V/7. Therein is a full account of Librarius Veneto Rallion and his valiant, if costly, accounts aboard the Herald of Misery. It is through the selfless sacrifice of many battle brothers' lives that we have at last been able to triangulate the astrogational coordinates. My lord, we know at least where these key fragments are being set. It is a system on the very border of the warp rift known as the Somnian Stars. As soon as our pursuit is concluded, I urge that we make all haste to investigate this locale with whatever additional support can be redirected. My instincts whisper that the two matters are intertwined, and that great dooms may turn upon their resolution. May the Primarch guide our steps in these coming days. Bors had been counted amongst those whom the Dark Angels named Fallen. He was a hulking warrior whose black power armor bore the scars and wear of long service, scars fit to match those of his body and soul. A metal patch was bolted into his skull to cover a missing eye. His crackling power fist was of an old but venerable pattern. His mind was a strained repository, besieged by the attritional forces of extreme age and frequent transit through the tainted ocean of the warp, yet still capable of recalling snatches of the fall of once mighty Caliban. Bors remembered Luther's dark charisma. He recalled moments of the last savage battle that had seen the Dark Angel's homeworld shattered and the Fallen scattered across the galaxy by a colossal warp storm. And he remembered all too well the countless years since, lived as an exile, hunted from one bolt hole to the next. One place he had never expected to be was in a training hall aboard the Blood Angel strike cruiser, Absolution's Ire, surrounded by loyalist space marines. Until recently, he would have considered such warriors foes, as surely as he did the scions of chaos. It was thanks to his lord that all that had changed. Primarch Lion El Johnson, the demigod who had pardoned his sins, stoked in him a loyalty he had not known he could still feel, offered him a second chance at redemption in fealty to humanity and his gene sire. The very same being who was now storming towards him with a glowing relic blade in hand. Adrenaline shot through Bors as the lion swept his sword, fealty, in a flashing overhead arc and swung it down like a thunderbolt. Bors brought up his power fist to block the blow. The huge strength behind it drove him to one knee. Yet behind that devastating impact, he felt precision and control. The force of the strike could, he knew, have been far greater. Fealty could have scythed through his fist and his body, not halting until it buried itself in the hall's deck plates. "You are taking it easy on me, Lord," he grunted. Bors twisted away, eking a sliver of space in which to slide out from under the blade and roll aside. The lion's lips quirked in a hard smile. "No benefit to me if I break you, Bors. You are more useful as a sparring partner with body and soul united." "I make a fine distraction too, Lord," Bors shot back as his brothers Brunan and Rufael lunged towards the lion. Brunan, veteran assault specialist that he was, came at Lion El Johnson from the side with a howling chainsaw in each hand. Rufael struck from behind the lion with a power sword borrowed from the training racks. Bors's brothers attacked as he taught them, blending the martial grace of Calibanite knights with the opportunistic ferocity of honorless piratical raiders. So had they survived the perils of a hostile galaxy as outcasts, as fallen. The lion whirled to meet his attackers with blinding speed. This was far from the first time he had employed bands of his redeemed knights as sparring partners. He knew how they fought. They, in turn, knew never to hold anything back. Their lord would not thank them for entertaining the worry that they might harm him. Besides, when attacking a Primarch, the only way to stand a chance of landing a blow was to go all out. Even then, Bors thought, that chance was slim enough. Fealty met one of Brunan's blades with a clash that rang through the training hall. At the same time, the lion somehow interposed his shield, the Emperor's shield, to name it truly, between Rufael and the chestplate of his ornate armor. The impact triggered the masterwork conversion field built into the shield, eliciting a blast of light and force. Rufael was thrown back by the shockwave. He slammed down on his back, rolled, and came up in a fighting crouch, even as his blade skittered away across the decking. Already the lion had returned his attention to Brunan, and was driving him back with a blistering series of cuts and thrusts. Parrying wildly, Brunan gave ground. "Bors, we have audience enough without you joining them," shouted the assault marine. Bors realized with a jolt that he had become hypnotized by the flowing economy and grace of the lion's blade work. What Brunan said was true. More than a dozen blood angels and at least as many serfs spectated the bout from doorways and balconies. Bors felt unsettled in such company already, without some golden-haired son of Sanguinius smirking at him for lollygagging when he ought to be fighting. Bors broke into a charge, black-armoured boots pounding the deck plates as he raced to Brunan's aid. Rufael followed his lead, ripping his paired combat knives from their sheaths and surging in from the Lion's blind spot. To be caught between three such ancient, veteran Space Marine warriors would have been death for almost any foe. The Lion barely broke stride. A blow from the Emperor's shield threw Brunan onto his back. Flowing smoothly onwards, the Lion extended the attack into a graceful leap that carried him over his prone opponent and interposed Brunan's toppled form as a sudden and unexpected obstacle between Bors and Rufael. The two practiced warriors sidestepped Brunan with fluid ease, yet the effort slowed them both by a split second. To a being of such inhuman skill and swiftness as the Lion, it might as well have been an hour. Bors' lightning-wreathed haymaker met the Emperor's shield, and he was blown backwards amidst a raging nova of golden light. Half-blinded, Bors saw Rufael as a dark silhouette stretched long as his brother lunged with a knife. The Lion's cloak billowed as he executed another skillful sidestep and allowed Rufael to overextend, center of balance gone. The flat of fealty connected with Rufael's backpack, and the redeemed knight was hurled onto his face. Again, Rufael rolled with the impact and regained his footing. Rich crimson blood ran from his newly crooked nose, where it had struck the deck plates, but his eyes remained fixed intently on the Lion. The Primarch paused and put up his blade. Bors and his brothers circled warily, bruised, bleeding, breathing hard. The Lion looked as fresh as when their bout had begun. "Give us the room," said El Johnson. He did not raise his voice, yet his words reverberated through the hall, redolent with such assurance and force of will that the Blood Angels and their serfs obeyed instantly. Robed figures faded back from balconies. Door hatches hissed shut. Bors wondered, not for the first time, whether there was something supernatural in the Lion's effortless ability to impose his will on others, and whether it had always been thus, or whether it was something that had changed in the millennia since Caliban. Once again, Bors wondered what had happened to the Lion after the destruction of Caliban on the onset of the Warp Rift. The planet had been torn to pieces. The Fallen had been snatched up and flung through time and space. Bors knew this much, had lived it, and he wondered if the same had been true of the Lion. He did not know, and it seemed that, from what little they had discussed of it, the Primarch did not either. The Lion had told his redeemed only that his first memory since those cataclysmic events was of finding himself walking upon the shadowed paths of what he called his forest. The strange half-real routes through a shadowy arboreal realm of mists and monsters that Bors believed must pass through the warp, and which seemed always to bring the Lion to that place where he was needed most. It was but one of the mysteries that shrouded the Lion as surely as his hooded cloak. But then, thought Bors, we were ever a secretive breed. The Lion watched them circle, then barked out in a parade-ground shout. "What are you?" "Dark Angels, my lord," they replied. He scowled. "I still hear echoes of another name behind those words, my sons. I tell you again to unburden yourself of it, for I have absolved you. You may speak freely in this place, for the Watchers ensure none shall hear us. You are fallen no more. You never truly fell. There is no taint in you, or I would have known it when first we met, and that moment would have been your last. So tell me again, my risen sons, what are you?" "Dark Angels!" This time Bors and his brothers roared the words, and as they did, he felt the fierce need to be worthy of the title. "Where did I find you?" the Lion demanded. "Upon the questing road, upon the Liberator's path, amidst the shadow and the misty ways. And whom do you serve, my sons?" "The Lion!" they cried. "The Emperor!" Those words still felt unfamiliar in Bors's mouth. He had long ago thought himself divorced from humanity and their carrion lord, an arrangement of mutual loathing he had found wholly acceptable. Yet in bending the knee to the lion and accepting his Genesire's forgiveness, Bors had found himself wishing to be worthy not just of the lion's service, but by extension, the service of the Emperor himself. Bors's unnaturally long life and the cruel ministrations of time and the warp had seen many early memories buried or corroded. He could not recall if he had ever truly served the Emperor before. He remembered fleeting shards of Caliban, of Luther's uncanny influence, and the bitterness that fallen Lord had engendered in his followers. Then had come the lion, after so long a span of time-scattered exile, offering a chance at redemption. So perhaps Bors had never truly served the Emperor before, but he knew that now, no matter how strange it might seem even to him, he wished to do so. Bors wanted to acquit himself, such as to truly earn his absolution. The three risen warriors had regrouped, Rufiel recovering his borrowed power sword. Brunan had exchanged his damaged chainsword, its buckled teeth half sheared away, for another from the racks. Bors and his warriors took stances, ready for the next round, but the lion remained statue still. "You hesitate, my sons. You are disquieted. Why?" They glanced at one another. "Word is, we are even now nearing the Somnian stars," said Bors. "That is so," El Johnson replied. "Commander Dante is more certain than ever. This blight that has troubled my father's realm stems from this place. I hear whispers of my own to confirm it, but this you already knew." Bors noted his lord's continuing reticence to give the Imperium its title. He heard the sliver of contempt that underlaid the control in the Primarch's voice. Not aimed at the Emperor, for the lion was as loyal as a son to him as ever a father could wish for. Not for mankind either, not really. The lion had told Bors in a moment of candor that he could not despise those whom his father had always intended to give the stars, though he was dismayed at the squalor, ignorance, and fear he had witnessed since his awakening. No, thought Bors. It was for the dignitaries and bureaucrats that the lion reserved his contempt, and the throngs of pompous and pusillanimous adepts and priests. This was the loathing that Bors and his lord shared. "It is not a battle that awaits us, lord," said Rufiel, "but rather it is those alongside whom you will soon fight." The lion finished. He let out a slow breath, expression unreadable, then dropped into a fighting stance. The implicit command was unmistakable. The pause was over. A new bout began. The lion flourished his blade and feinted towards Brunan. The old assault veteran was too canny to be fooled. He held his ground and firmed his stance, ready to threaten the lion's flanks when the Primarch chose his true target. El Johnson flashed a wry grin, then his face set into unreadable stone again. "You still harbour resentments?" he asked. Bors felt himself stung by the disappointment he heard in the lion's voice. "Hard to look past them hunting us for centuries, lord," said Bors. "But no, that is not it." He stepped swiftly in and aimed a blow at the lion's right side. He expected the attack to be deflected, which it was, but he also hoped it would create an opening for Brunan to exploit. It did not. The veteran assault marine reeled back from another flare of the Emperor's shield. "Then what?" asked the lion, wheeling, taking them all in as they circled him like a pack of forest beasts closing around a knight alone amongst the trees. El Johnson feinted again, this time turning the move into a lunge that caught Rufiel off guard and forced him to backpedal or take a blade through his chestplate. Seeing the lion extend his reach, Bors and Brunan both surged in to attack, only to be beaten back by a blistering set of cuts and parries. Bors suspected that his lord already knew what was in their minds, was simply drawing it out of them for their own good. The lion seemed to know much that, by rights, even he could not. Bors wondered what the watchers in the dark whispered to the Primarch when no other was there to hear. Even now the strange creatures lurked in the hall's deepest shadows, where not even the Blood Angels had detected them. "We were fallen," said Bors, the words escaping his lips amidst harsh grunts as he traded fierce blows with the lion. "To the unforgiven we still will be." The lion pressed, goading Bors to ever more ferocious counterattacks, then suddenly faded back like parting mists. Wrong-footed, Bors stumbled forward and was forced to waste a precious second righting himself. He wheeled, expecting a blow, but saw instead that the lion had crossed the distance to Rufiel, disarming, then laying him out with swift blows. Brunan was next, and he weathered the lion's strikes better, but was forced into a stumbling retreat that left Bors alone before his lord. "I sought you out," said the lion, prowling towards Bors and pushing him back with a string of deft strikes. "I looked into your souls, knew you for who and what you are, forgave each of you. I offered absolution and you took it. Do you believe that my word on this will not be good enough for the rest of my sons? That they will try to do you harm against my express command?" Bors was forced to give way before the lion's blows. It came to him, as a last strike caught him across the temple and threw him onto his back, that the lion was airing his own concerns. And why would he not? Bors thought dazedly. All El Johnson had seen of his father's realm since his return was intolerance and ignorance, fear and superstition. He must hope that his own loyal sons would be above such weaknesses. But he could not know where the rot had stopped, and he had been failed before, after all. Vision swimming back into focus, Bors read contrition on the lion's noble features. The Primarch knew he had vented a portion of his frustrations upon Bors, and regretted it. It was this that resolved Bors to be completely honest with his lord. As the lion hauled him to his feet, the old pirate shook his head. "I hope they have the wisdom to obey your commands, lord. But even if they loathe me, I would still fight to aid them if that is your command, and do so gladly. All we risen would do likewise, Brunan, Rufiel, all the others aboard this vessel." "And yet," asked the lion. "Our presence taints you, lord," said Bors, trying to keep the bitterness from his words. "For 10,000 years the unforgiven have hunted us. Now, in an age when the Imperium is harder pressed than it has been since Caliban's sundering, in a galaxy where all the old certainties are upended, you return. But you do so with us at your side. The Dark Angels and their get are insular, paranoid, utterly merciless," added Rufiel. "They are unrelenting as a pack of lupids with the blood-scent lord, and dogmatic to the point of thoughtless intolerance," said Brunan, making no effort to hide his anger and resentment. The lion deactivated the power field of fealty and rested the blade's point against the deck plates. He swept his gaze over Bors and his brothers each in turn. It was an effort of will for Bors to meet his Genesire's eyes. He felt suddenly foolish, and unsettled by something fey and almost wild that he saw lurking behind the lion's glinting pupils. Bors seemed suddenly to scent the mist-wet canopy and damp loam of the forest, to feel its shadowed boughs pressing close about him until his skin prickled with their touch. He heard the forest's breathless stillness, and the furtive movement of something huge circling, creeping closer. He caught acrid animal musk, coarse fur, old blood caked into jaws lathered in drool. The hot breath of something ancient and dreadful seemed to pull impossibly against the nape of his neck, while before his eyes the lion became indistinct, as though wreathed in mist. Then El Johnson barked a hard laugh, and the spell was broken. The forest tendrils receded, its imagined denizens with it. Bors stood once again in a training hall on the Absolution's ire, with his Genesire before him and his brothers close to hand. The lion sheathed fealty. Bors and his brothers deactivated or set aside their own weapons, understanding the bout to be at an end. "The Dark Angels are my sons," said the lion, in a tone that brooked no disagreement. "All the dark angels, those who name themselves unforgiven, and those they call fallen. I have not forgotten this, and you may take my oath upon it that I will not allow it to be overlooked by anyone else. I care not whether they be lowly serf or my father himself upon his golden throne." "My lord," said Bors, his heart thudding. He dropped to one knee, driven down by the force of conviction in the lion's calm but utterly relentless words. He saw his brothers follow suit. "I reject none but the faithless," El Johnson continued. "The betrayers, those who spurned all that the First Legion ever stood for, those who instead sullied their magnificence with the poisonous taint of chaos, as did the traitor Seraphax, as did Luther." No matter the millennia that had passed, and all the miles uncounted that he had travelled since that last terrible day on Caliban, still the name of the arch-betrayer caused Bors a shudder of anger and guilt. "Even such as they may know my forgiveness," said the lion, his words hard and clipped. "But understand, my sons, their only absolution comes beneath the keen edge of my blade. So shall I end their suffering, their corruption, and the dishonour that they embody by their very act of being. But you—" The lion set aside blade and shield to reach down with both hands. He clasped Bors by his shoulder guards and raised him back to his feet again. He moved between them and repeated the process for each of his kneeling warriors before he spoke again. "You are my risen sons. You do me nothing but honour by your presence at my side. So shall it be known by all." Bors was unable to find any words to express the pride and gratitude he felt in that moment. Before he could marshal his thoughts, a klaxon blared through the hall, and then fell silent. "First translation clarion," said Brunnen. "The hour draws nigh." "And we shall be its equals and more," said the lion, with such absolute conviction that Bors knew it as a truth and fundamental to his very being. "We are with you, Lord," he said. "And in that we all are fortunate," the lion replied, gathering up his war gear and raising his cowl so it shadowed his face. He clapped a gauntleted hand against Bors's shoulder guard as he made for the nearest door hatch. "Gather the redeemed and make ready for battle, my sons. We go to do the Emperor's work, not for glory or for vengeance, but because loyalty is its own reward." The Risen and Redeemed. Lochok, whose wrath blazed forth in star-wrought beams, whose oil hearts beat ever to duty's rhyme, whose name was called the Red Whisper. Bors, whose was called One Eye, yet always sought true, whose strike was sudden, singular, unstoppable, whose oath was to liege, but not to realm. Zabriel, whose voice was the voice of the Redeemer King, whose hope was the hope for all of mankind, whose gun and whose blade blazed righteous. Asbiel, who prized above all the lives of his brothers in arms, whose tarnished honour his ministrations did salve, who stood unyielding as a tower of pale stone. Rufael, whose service was unfaltering even through the darkest times, whose eye fell keen where death soon followed for his foes, who stood in the breach at the Inkar and wavered not. Afkar, he who was ancient and yet ungraven by time, whose trust grew slowly, yet whose fealty was ironclad, who struck true despite the tempest and the shadow. Nothing now remains of the realm my father wrought, Whatever light we spread between the stars has guttered and died, and in its place stretches darkness without end. Our enemies move freely through the galaxy of shadows, and believe themselves always to be hunters, never prey. That is their mistake. I will teach them to fear the darkness in which they dwell, and to dread the shadow they believe their allies. For there is no greater terror hunting the Stygian void than the Lion of Caliban. Lion El Johnson, Bane of Chaos, Knight of the Nihilus, Lord of the Shadowed Paths. The Lure. In the wake of Vashtorr's attack upon the rock, the Dark Angels turned their talents for torture and interrogation upon the heretic Astartes that had been captured in the fighting. They sought Vashtorr's whereabouts, so that they might revenge themselves upon the demon. They gained the insights they desired, yet the manner in which this revelation was delivered seemed deeply suspicious. Within the command sanctum of the rock, the masters of the Dark Angels had gathered. Crew serfs attended to their stations around the chamber's edges. Maintenance servitors lumbered past, too limited and single-minded to be distracted from the repair work still required after the heretic assault. And still damage remained that would yet take months, in some cases even years, to make right. The masters stood in a circle, armor and skin patchworked in harlequin hues by the light falling through the command sanctum's huge stained armor-glass windows. Supreme Grandmaster Azrael led the gathering. His body was now fully used to its Primaris enhancements, and healed of the wounds suffered dueling with Vashtorr. With him stood Master Belial of the Deathwing, Master Samael of the Ravenwing, Chief Librarian Ezekiel, and Interrogator Chaplain Asmodai, as well as a number of the chapter's company masters. Augmenting this august assemblage were the heroes of numerous unforgiven chapters, the Dark Angel's successors and closest allies. Several were present in person. Chapter Master Modron, in the bone and grey of the Angels of Absolution. Master Lephazia, boasting the halved heraldry of the Angels of Redemption. Grand Master Nakir, in the sable of the Consecrators. Captain Herald Khazar, of the Cowled Wardens. Others such as Master Psychora, of the Blades of Vengeance, and Captain Lysaeus, of the Penitent Blades, were present as flickering hololithic projections. The Dark Angels had been gathering the strength of the Unforgiven ever since they had learned the location of Vashtorr's stronghold. All at once, after weeks of excoriation, all of their heretic captives had suddenly known and willingly blurted the precise astrogational coordinates, seeming as surprised as the Dark Angels. They had given up not just the region to be searched, on the fringes of the warp rift known as the Somnian Stars, but had further pinpointed the remote idolatras system. Azrael and his comrades could not fail to recognize so obvious a trap. As Master Samuel observed, it was a taunt by Vashtorr, who had somehow implanted the knowledge in their captives' minds for just that purpose. Yet the Sons of the Lion could not ignore the challenge issued. The legions of Abaddon and Vashtorr continued to wreak havoc across the Imperium, and the Dark Angels were duty-bound to end the carnage and banish the Arkifane if they could. Moreover, they had been done a grievous insult by the invasion of the Rock, one Supreme Master Azrael meant to see answered. To walk into a trap unprepared would be foolish, of course. The Dark Angels would not rush into danger like over-eager neophytes. Instead, they had commenced preparations, even as they set the rock into a steady heading towards their destination. Short warp jumps were employed to minimize risk to the battle-damaged Fortress Monastery, while every available tech marine and servitor strove to effect repairs as swiftly as they could. Through secretive means, Supreme Grandmaster Azrael summoned not only those unforgiven chapters he could contact, but also as much of his own as could be recalled from Crusade. Consternation blighted several Indomitus Crusade battle groups as their Dark Angel complements left without explanation and vanished into the warp in answer to this coded summons. With each translation from warp space, the rock rendezvoused with reinforcements. Larger and larger grew Azrael's combined force, until more than 3/4 of the might of the Unforgiven was at the Supreme Grand Master's command. Rarely since the mighty Space Marine legions of old had so great an assemblage of Adeptus Astartes warships and warriors amassed to assault a single target. Yet the Dark Angels and their allies knew that brute force alone was no guarantee of victory. An adaptable battle plan would be required. Informed by all the strategic intelligence they could gather prior to launching their attack, it was the task of the gathered masters within the strategium of the rock to formulate that plan. Forewarned. The Unforgiven have a long history of hunting the fallen. To seek, locate, and run to ground such cunning and dangerous quarry requires specialist formations of warriors trained exactingly in the arts of stealthy intelligence gathering and swift ambush across both interstellar and planetary theaters. Amidst the ranks of the Dark Angels, this duty falls primarily to the Second Company, the Raven Wing. They in turn have acted as the template for numerous similar formations within other Forgiven chapters. Now Azrael and his fellows tasked those formations with racing ahead of their advance and scouting the system bordering the Somnian stars in detail. It was their mission to uncover what enemy strength lurked in that region and, if at all possible, what manner of trap awaited the Unforgiven. The scouting forces were to remain undetected, the better to keep the Arkifane's followers guessing if or when vengeance would descend upon them. The debate between the masters moved to matters of force disposition, extended command structures, and overlapping combat doctrines. Amidst this discussion, Chief Librarian Ezekiel offered another suggestion. Though the primary focus of the Unforgiven Librarians was the insidious art of interomancy, there were many amongst their number talented in scrying and oracular foresight. These brothers could try to tease apart the strands of fate and learn what awaited in the idolatrous system. It would be a terrible risk for them to cast their minds out onto the tides of the warp while surrounded by the raging tempest of the Imperium Nihilus. Yet Ezekiel argued that, as the Rock and its sister ships were already braving those lightless maelstroms with every perilous warp jump, they were already at risk, regardless. Besides, there would be greater danger still if the Unforgiven were to miss some vital detail that allowed Vashtorr's trap to ensnare them. Thus, he was granted permission to proceed by Azrael's Council of Masters. The Masters' planning continued for many hours, even as their fleets maneuvered into position around the rock, ready for the next jump towards their destination. In the end, while it incorporated many strategic complexities, the overall plan decided upon was straightforward and robust. Their fleet would translate from the warp as one, spread out across an extended region that would make it nigh on impossible to ambush. Forewarned of their foes' dispositions, the Unforgiven would halt the jaws of any trap as they attempted to close, then press on, overwhelming their enemies, locating Vashtorr and putting an end to his infernal machinations. Sidebar. Tuchulcha. Deep within the rock lie secret vaults containing esoteric weapons, some of which date back to the dark age of technology. Amongst the strangest of these is the mysterious Tuchulcha engine. Ostensibly a device of alien manufacture and breathtaking antiquity, the Tuchulcha was recovered by Lion El Johnson. It displayed an unsettling intellect, communicating through puppet revenants, and seemingly almost obscenely keen to offer its strange brand of aid, which involved acting as a pilot engine for unnatural swift and accurate warp transits. After the catastrophic death of Caliban and the disappearance of the Lion, the Tuchulcha engine was stored in, or found its way into, the rock's deepest vaults, where it languished long in shadow. Yet the engine's fate was bound to that of the Dark Angels, and in the dwindling years of Millennium 41, it was rediscovered with dramatic consequences. upon the brink. The final mustering point of the Unforgiven prior to their assault upon Vashtorr's stronghold lay in a desolate region of wilderness space. By the time they gathered there, the voyage through the tumultuous shadows of the Imperium Nihilus had taken its toll. Despite all precautions, ships had been scattered, damaged or lost with each dangerous leap into the Imperium. After each such setback, Supreme Grandmaster Azrael had bitterly castigated himself. He was one of only a few Dark Angels who knew that the Tutorcha engine lay deep within the rock, and that, had he been prepared to risk its taint, he might have eased his fleet's passage. Yet the one time he and his fellows of the Inner Circle had employed the device in living memory, the consequences had been dire, and the great warlord of chaos had almost succeeded in damning the Unforgiven wholesale. Azrael would shoulder the burden of lives and warships lost more gladly than he would risk trusting the Tutorcha engine again. He consoled himself with the knowledge that the fleet he had assembled was still a colossal gathering of might, despite the losses of transit. Moreover, he and his fellow masters had taken every precaution to prepare for the coming battle. The fleet had not long gathered at their mustering point before several swift scout frigates returned from reconnoitering the enemy's positions. The shipmasters had left the bulk of the Raven Wing and other scout squadrons to continue their observations, and had brought their accumulated intelligence back in person. They had sworn to ensure it reached Azrael's Council of Masters without risking it being intercepted by the foe or tainted by warp distortion. This choice had led them to both the Bone Dagger and the Valiant Blade suffering damage during warp transit, while the frigate Onyx Raymond had been hurled off course and would not return in time for the coming battle. But the strategic value of their findings justified such risks. Slipping undetected through the fringes of the idolatras system and its neighbouring Sacrilem and Apostra systems, Unforgiven scout ships had confirmed the presence of multiple heretic fleets. By the cold light of Sacrilem's silver giant star, a mingled armada of Emperor's children and renegade warships had been sighted and its considerable strength assessed. Subtle auspex sweeps and energistic analysis had revealed a second gathering, this time of Death Guard, Black Legion, and Word-bearer vessels, lurking amidst the dense particulate nebula of their Apostra system. Largest of all was the Netherworld Blade Bell Fleet, a gathering of demonic void barks and dark mechanicum forge ships led by their colossal and grotesque Ark of Omen. This force awaited in the idolatrous system itself. Much of its strength was reported orbiting the system's 3 settled and seemingly enslaved worlds, while other vessels patrolled the deeper void. Though it had proved impossible to gain detailed insight into their composition, the Bale Fleet's forces displayed a strong tendency towards tech heresy and infernal industry, while the Ark of Omen itself was bloated with techno-organic extrusions that hinted at extensive augmentation and experimentation. There could be little doubt that here were worshippers of the Arkifane. Ezekiel's librarians had also had some success in their scrying efforts. This esoteric intelligence gathering had not been achieved without cost. Codicia Thesic of the Consecrators had died of catastrophic empiric trauma, while several other librarians were so mentally and spiritually damaged that their recovery was doubtful. For their pains, the oracular cavern had gained a vision of a darkened mirror, haloed by the blazing light of a poisonous star. As they watched, lines of fire had spider-webbed that mirror before it blew apart into a storm of jagged shards that rushed towards them. Before the shards struck home and the vision was ripped apart, the librarians had seen the star's infernal light wretched in roiling fumes, even as the light itself became a pair of vast lantern-like eyes. Chief Librarian Ezekiel affirmed that Vashtorr did indeed await in the idolatras system, and that he had readied some diabolical trap there that either involved the system star or else would originate from that quarter. The mirror, the librarians agreed, suggested that the demon's scheme would draw upon the nature of the Unforgiven themselves, turning some element of their own culture or dogma against them. This was an especially disquieting notion for those of the chapter's inner circles, and to Azrael and his fellow masters most of all, for they knew dark and troubling secrets about their chapter that most of their battle brethren did not. Some elements of the intelligence gathered were easier to interpret and act upon than others, but all were taken into consideration as the Council of Masters issued their final battle orders. The Unforgiven fleets of the Cowled Wardens, Blades of Vengeance, and Guardians of the Covenant, as well as accompanying elements from several other chapters, were assigned strike coordinates against the enemy's ships waiting in the Sacrilem and Apostra systems. Those heretic ambushers surely waited for a signal to dive into the warp and close the trap in the idolatras system. Instead, they would be struck by sudden Unforgiven surprise. The ambushers would be ambushed, and the more obvious elements of Vashtorr's trap disarmed. Meanwhile, librarians and chaplains spread themselves out across as many ships as possible in the main assault force, which consisted of the Dark Angel's fleet and all their remaining Unforgiven allies. While the Council of Masters could not be sure exactly what the vision warning meant, they could do what was possible to ward their ships against infernal powers. Every battle brother was girded for war, from the hoariest veterans to the greenest neophyte. Every voidcraft, interceptor, dreadnought ancient, and war engine was roused and ready. The fleet ship masters had been briefed to expect an emergency translation order should Vashtorr's trap turn out to be the explosive destruction of the system's star, or some equally grand and mutually destructive lunacy. The rock itself would hang back as the command and control center for the entire vast onslaught. Meanwhile, more than a dozen separate battle groups of Unforgiven warships would deploy in a supporting spread, focused enough to crush any opposition, but widely spread so as to prevent easy ambush or encirclement. At the Supreme Grand Master's order, the signal rippled out through the warp fleets of the Unforgiven. Bells tolled and prayers rose through enginariums as warp drives snarled to life and Geller fields shimmered into being. The veil of real space tore asunder, and the vengeful sons of the Lion rode to war. Ahead of us lies conflict with foes insidious and infernal. That they will employ duplicity and the dark powers of the warp against us is a certainty. Yet such weapons can gain no purchase upon hearts and minds armored in certainty, duty, and absolute knowledge of righteousness. So do we gird ourselves in the armor of contempt. So do we harden our souls against the trickery of demons. So shall we walk once more into the fire, my brothers, and emerge victorious in the Emperor's name. Interrogator Chaplain Asmodai. Into idolatras. The rock erupted from the warp at its destination, streamers of unreality tattering off its crackling shields like pennants burning to ash. Scores of Unforgiven warships translated all around it in a rapidly established combat formation that spoke to the skill of navigators and shipmasters both. The moment warp transit shutters were raised and auspicator arrays awoken, the Space Marine sensors were awash with vast and unnatural energies. Where the scout ships had risked only passive sensor sweeps to minimize the chance of detection, this armada was about to turn its full and inescapable glare upon the idolatras system. It detected an aberration. The contact was still too distant for visual imaging. Apparent efforts had been made by Vashtorr to mask its presence, using the raging energy outputs from both the system's star and the unnatural nebula of the Somnian stars that churned close at hand. Yet nothing could fully hide the mysterious contact waiting near the heart of the system, for it radiated vast energy signatures, both conventional and empiric. There could be little doubt that here was the end result of Vashtorr and Abaddon's efforts to gather arcana from across the galaxy. Whatever it was, Azrael deemed there to be no more important contact in the entire system. He ordered a steady advance upon it by all craft. As reported, an entire Bale fleet lay between the Unforgiven and the Mystery Contact. It was, however, scattered between the system's worlds and its various patrol routes. Moreover, even had it been concentrated into a single formation, the heretic fleet was neither as numerous nor as mighty as that of the Unforgiven. This did not stop the Netherworld Blade and its escorts rising like carrion birds from their orbit around the nearest world and setting an intercept course for the Rock. Heretic patrol groups swelled their formation as they poured on speed, closing the gap with the eagerness of zealots. Soon enough, shoals of torpedoes were rushing soundlessly through the void, and clouds of interceptors were spilling from the launch bays of both fleets. Standing at the heart of the Rock Strategium, his eyes fixed on the tactical void screens, helm under one arm, Azrael allowed himself a wintry smile. It seemed the heretics were offering him a fight. Dread Defense. The first blows of the Battle of Idolatras were struck by defensive laser batteries and squadrons of void-borne fighter craft, knocking out onrushing torpedoes. Nephilim jet fighters and Dark Talon interceptors blew apart one heretic projectile after another, even as a wheeling flock of Helldrakes and winged demons attempted to do the same to the massed ordnance launched by the Unforgiven. Here and there a salvo of torpedoes broke through, only to blossom into fiery ruin amidst the criss-cross fire of defensive turrets, or detonate against warships' dancing void shields. Next, the fighter craft met in fierce dogfights in the cold and merciless void. Even as they spiraled above one another in a flicker-lit dance of death, so the squadrons of combat craft were dwarfed by the Leviathan warships they escorted. These rumbled past the skirling dogfights, or else forced them to scatter like sea monsters, sweeping through panicked shoals of fish. Lance batteries, bombardment cannons, and biomechanical weapons of indeterminate nature lit the void with their fury as the warships closed on one another. The Unforgiven had a significant advantage in numbers, and even the smallest of their scout frigates boasted firepower worthy of a far larger vessel. For all this, the worshippers of Vashtorr were privy to the darkest secrets of infernal manufacture, and many of their systems defied the laws of physics. Moreover, these weapons' puissance was only enhanced by the proximity of the Somnian stars. Their strange biomechanical veins and receptors extended to harness the warp energies pouring from the rift. So it was that, even as fresh salvos of torpedoes filled the darkness, and lance blasts bit deep into multiple traitor warships, the heretics began to inflict stinging casualties upon the Unforgiven. The strike cruiser Boundless Resolve was struck by tendrils of livid crimson lightning that erupted from the emitters of a freakish Dark Mechanicum warship. Where the carmine energy crawled across the strike cruiser's hull, metal bubbled and ran like hot wax. Within the Space Marine vessel, the lightning manifested as screaming electro-geists that blasted their victims' souls from their bodies with but a touch. At the same time, the Penitent Blades frigates Watchman and Sanctified Malice were slammed together by a colossal grav beamer and ground into ruin as they struggled to disentangle themselves. More grotesque yet were the weapons of the demonic warships. Some of these strange vessels might once have been craft of mortals, lost upon the tides of the Empyrean and claimed by the malevolent servants of the ruinous powers. These boasted hulls transmuted into ruggous flesh or flame-wreathed crystal, and were armed with snaking tendrils, cavernous fanged maws, batteries of brazen carronades, firing explosive skulls the size of dropships, and myriad other nightmare weapons. Then there were the vessels that could only endure in real space, thanks to the unholy energies of the nearby warp storm. Archaic galleons of glittering silver that unleashed prismatic beams from shining sails, vast flies encrusted with bizarre structures and weapons batteries, bat-winged pyramids of brass and bone the size of capital ships, whose flanks teemed with demonic warriors eager to board their foes and butcher all in their paths. Amidst these nightmare vessels advanced the Netherworld Blade. Hails of parasitic missiles, corrosive beams, volkite conflagration blasts, and unreality lances erupted from every inch of its mutated hull. In the opening minutes of the engagement alone, the Ark of Omen accounted for an entire squadron of Disciples of Caliban frigates, as well as the strike cruisers Retribution Incarnate and Voyager in Darkness. In the face of such disproportionate carnage, many foes would have broken and fled. The Unforgiven instead closed the gaps in their formations, swore fresh oaths of vengeance for the slain, and fought back with renewed fury. Strike cruisers of the Dark Angels and the Bringers of Judgment conducted a skillful pincer attack upon a formation of Dark Mechanicum forged ships, striking from above and below simultaneously. Rolling as they passed between their foes, the Space Marine warships hammered their targets with volley after volley of lance and battery fire. They left the Dark Mechanicum vessels Gorgon, Nebulous Mind, Spawn of Loathing, and Akororkum burning and drifting in their wake. At the same time, the battle barges Redoubtable and Bane of Heretics caught a trio of freakish demon ships between them and brutalized them with an intense crossfire. Accompanied by chaplains and librarians, stalwart boarding parties of Unforgiven struck at the foundering demon vessels to administer the death blow. Many battle brothers who survived the ensuing boarding actions refused to speak of the horrors they witnessed aboard those unnatural warships. Yet, as the last Dark Angels boarders withdrew, drenched in ichor and wearing haunted expressions, they left only discorporated masses of ectoplasm and wreckage behind them. Azrael and his council of masters observed the developing shape of the battle. Some from stratagems or the command thrones of warships, others from amidst the blood and fire of boarding assaults. They saw their own battle lines bow under the initial chaos onslaught, only to tighten and reform. Those tendrils of the Bale fleet that had broken through towards the rock found themselves surrounded, battered from all angles by loyalist gunnery until their ships came apart amidst the storm. Others that had attempted to outflank the Unforgiven or had held back to trade fire with them became prey for swift counterattacks by faster strike cruisers and frigates. After its initial charge, it became clear that the Netherworld Blade was seeking to evade and stall as best it could, its masters likely awaiting the arrival of ambushing allies destined never to appear. Ambushed. In the Apostra and Sacrilem systems, the Unforgiven ambush fleet struck with devastating force. The Apostra system in particular. The nebulous void clouds allowed the cowled wardens, blades of vengeance, and attached raven-wing squadrons to keep close to and encircle their foes before they struck. Ferocious void battles erupted in both systems as the traitors realized their peril and, shrugging off grievous casualties, turned at bay to fight back. Conscious that the trailing elements of the Bale fleet were rushing to reinforce their Ark of Omen, and unwilling to waste time lest he give Vashtorr a chance to escape, Azrael ordered an all-out attack. The Unforgiven fleet surged forward as one, enfolding the Netherworld Blade like a many-limbed monster grasping its prey. Master Samael was the first to land a telling blow upon the immense ark, his flagship, Implacable Justice, striking suddenly from beneath the Leviathan and blasting a glowing rent in its underbelly. Into that sparking chasm poured Unforgiven boarding craft by the score, disgorging entire strike forces of merciless warriors who drove the heretics before them with bot and blade. Massed bombardments from Unforgiven capital ships knocked out the Ark of Omen's huge engines one by one. Even as squadrons of interceptors streaked low over its hull to eliminate defense turrets and shield nodes with strafing runs and hails of missiles. The Netherworld Blade did not die quickly. It slew the Redoubtable and sorely damaged 5 other Unforgiven vessels, even in its death throes. Yet die it did. With its hide blasted and rent even as its innards were torn apart from within. By the time the Unforgiven drew back from the ruin of the Netherworld blade, what had been a fearsome Ark of Omen was nothing but a hollowed-out hulk, tumbling ponderously away through the void. Satisfied, the Council of Masters ordered all those ships still battle-worthy to reform and press on towards the system's star. Their true target awaited them. Nightmare revealed. The Unforgiven pressed deeper into the idolatras system with their real space engines blazing. Minutes, then hours crawled past as they drew closer to their target. Periodically, force-appropriate squadrons peeled off to intercept remnants of the Bale fleet rushing at them with suicidal fury. Each such engagement made the heretic defenders look more desperate, especially in light of their ambushers' failure to arrive. None amongst the Council of Masters was fooled into believing that victory could be won so easily, however. Naturally suspicious at the best of times, the Unforgiven maintained watchful vigilance for fresh threats, even as they waited impatiently for visual confirmation of whatever horrors Vashtorr had fashioned at the system's heart. It was during this approach that tech marines aboard the Rock reported a growing warp resonance, a subtle empiric harmonic shuddering through the battle station at a steadily increasing pitch. No source could be found for the phenomenon. Worse, as it built in power, so it began to interface with delicate mechanical systems. At the same time, while the strange resonance could not be physically heard or felt by any aboard the Rock, it nonetheless spawned a growing sense of surreality and nightmarish dislocation. Even veteran space marines found themselves unsettled, forced to repress sudden bouts of anger or distracted by phantom movements in their peripheral vision that triggered their hardwired combat instincts. Word spread through the fleet that, while the weird warp resonance was confined to the Rock itself, the calling sense of dread and invisible threat was not. Chaplains prowled the decks, intoning rites of spiritual fortitude. Librarians worked what warding rituals they could, or probed carefully with their powers to discover the source of the supernatural dissonance. Azrael did not need the Psyker's efforts to confirm what had already become a certainty in his mind, however. This aura of disquiet and heightened threat emanated from whatever infernal device Vashtorr had fashioned. It would only be banished by the destruction of that same abomination, whose visual imaging was moments from appearing upon the extreme range vidfeed of his fleet. The Supreme Grand Master girded himself for whatever manner of horror he was about to witness, confident in his battle brother's abilities to endure and overcome. Then came the first images of their target. A planet-sized mass silhouetted against the light of Idolatras's star. Azrael realized with a vertiginous lurch how wrong he had been. The dimensions and mass of the thing came first, confirmation of an entire world hanging in the void, as though waiting for the Dark Angels. Then came surface detail, cartographical analysis, and empiric orography, and with it, a revelation of utmost horror. Azrael's eyes danced over images of a world that was part industrial hellscape, part heaving masses of fire-veined bedrock, part colossal piston-driven, cog-filled machine. He saw sprawling cities atop pinnacles of iron-bound stone, or lurking in sulphurous-shrouded chasms, ablaze with the glow of infernal industry. He saw the distorted outlines of continental land masses, where tortured stone and jagged iron abutted oceans of molten metal or blazing petrochemicals. He saw all the dark masses reminiscent of forests, surely impossible upon a world so choked by pollutants and orbiting so close to a ferociously blazing star. All was monstrous to behold, yet it was as nothing to the lines of data script dredged from the deepest and most ancient cogitator banks of the Rock by emergency recognition subroutines the Dark Angels had not even known existed. Unfiltered, unexpected, uncontrolled. The information spilled in a screed of text across the auto-sensors of every unforgiven warrior in receiving range. Pattern identification was out of phase, but close enough to eliminate any possibility of error. Coastlines, urban sprawls, oceans and forests, gross empiric signature, all were distorted and deformed, yet the match was close enough to eliminate reasonable doubt. The world the Unforgiven were approaching was Caliban. Madness. At first, Azrael could only stare in blank incomprehension. Shock had him so profoundly in its grasp that, even with his post-human mind and centuries of combat experience, he was paralyzed. The Supreme Grand Master reeled. He struggled to accept what he was seeing. Could the ancient data spirits be mistaken? Was a monstrous edifice before him some mocking simulacrum, a trick created to appall and unbalance? Was he seeing an illusion, teased somehow from the ancestral memory within the shared gene seed of the Unforgiven by Vashtorr's artifact? Could that not be the trap Ezekiel and his brother librarians had warned of? On some level deeper even than instinct, Azrael knew that none of these suppositions were true. Impossible and nightmarish as it seemed, he was looking at the remains of the shattered Dark Angel's home world. By supernatural artifice beyond Azrael's capacity to imagine, the Arkifane had resurrected Caliban, in the most grotesque and disrespectful manner possible. It was a desecration of the bleakest sort, a blow to the very soul of every Unforgiven chapter. Perhaps worst of all, it was a corporeal exhumation of the Dark Angel's hidden shame, a titanic blasphemy that surely had the potential to bring down doom and judgment upon them by the simple fact of its existence. There was so much Azrael did not yet know or understand. How had Vashtorr done this? And why had the demon chosen Caliban of all worlds? How did the gathering key fragments connect to the undead planet before him? As a firestorm of wrath burst to life within him, Azrael knew one thing with absolute clarity. This abomination had to be purged of whatever foul beings inhabited it, and then, if at all possible, it must be utterly destroyed. The memory of Caliban must be put to rest anew, and its legacy buried forever. Becoming aware of the furore engulfing his fleet's Vox network, Azrael realized he was not alone in this conclusion. He knew the outrage spreading through the Unforgiven was a kind of madness, likely spurred on by that same aura of disquiet and danger his tech marines had reported. He knew also that he should find his center, douse the flames, urge caution and stoicism. Yet the sight before Azrael was a provocation that even he could not withstand. Seized by an all-consuming spiritual outrage and profound shock, the Supreme Grand Master ordered all ships onto an attack heading. Already reports were coming in of enemy warships rising from the infernal planet's orbit, and of countless potential defensive weapon emplacements awakening on its surface. Then came the inexplicable Auspex readings that, while fragmentary and confused, seemed to suggest a fresh heretic fleet of giant size had appeared as if from nowhere, to sail directly from the heart of Idolatras's star. Though they were not so lost to rage as to ignore these dangers, none checked the fury of the Unforgiven. It was as though all their collected guilt and bitterness had fermented to become a maddening drug. They would sweep aside whatever heretics stood in their path. They would strike at every potential weak spot across the planet's surface, and drive their blades deep in search of a means by which to strike a fatal blow. So vowed Azrael to himself, as he strode to join his brothers, preparing to perform combat drops onto the infernal world. Already, strategic cogitators were whirring furiously as they computed likely drop sites, possible enemy strengths, and unexpected void assault vectors. The Unforgiven would funnel every iota of their strategic skill and martial might into this assault, and no matter what it cost them, they would put an end to Vashtorr's twisted schemes. Star Trap. Abaddon and Vashtorr had known their ambushing fleets in the neighboring systems might be neutralized if the Unforgiven came in force. They had accordingly fashioned a berth where their own combined fleet could wait for battle without risking detection. During his invasion of the Rock, Vashtorr had employed an infernal technology that allowed him to cage pockets of warp space and bind them into the fabric of reality. Then, it had been employed to power his colossal weapon, the Unmaker. Now, he had expanded his efforts to create a sub-realm of warp space within the heart of the idolatras' system star, connecting to its surface by a stabilized warp corridor. So had their last and largest heretic fleet awaited the onset of the Unforgiven, ready to strike when their foes were confronted and thrown off balance by the horror of Caliban remade. As the Dark Angels reeled, then rallied to commence their planet strike, Abaddon and Vashtorr's armada burst from within the star to launch an ambush of their own. Abaddon stood upon the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, with Falcus Kyber at his side. The ancient warship was even now clearing the inner corona of the idolatrous system star, the battering fury of the celestial body held at bay by Vashtorr's empiric artifice. Abaddon was impressed despite himself. His alliance with the demon demigod had been strained, but in this moment he was glad he had not turned upon the Arkifane as his instincts had urged him to. Upon the bridge's gargoyle moor vidscreens, the resurrected cadaver of Caliban loomed large. No, not Caliban. Abaddon corrected himself. Vashtorr had christened his grotesque planet Wormwood. The name conveyed no special meaning to Abaddon, but he felt something portentous. In truth, he didn't care what the Arkifane called this hybrid world he had built. To Abaddon, it mattered only as the key. It was merely a means to a far greater end. Yet this key was not complete, not yet. So many seemingly random artifacts installed in biomechanical tech shrines across Wormwood's surface, the symbolic power feeding the demon world. And at its heart, 2 out of 3 inexpressibly ancient devices. Install the third, and between them they would create what Vashtorr termed his dissonance engine. "The Plague Heart," Abaddon murmured, as his ship slid into formation with a wedge of Black Legion battleships. "The Ouroboros. We lack only the Tuhulsha engine. Yet without it, all will have been for naught, Lord," said Kyber. Abaddon did not reply. He watched the scores of traitor warships fanned out around the Vengeful Spirit as the Aurak myriad surged from within the star accompanied by its Bale fleet. As Wormwood's supernatural defenses flared in response to the onslaught of Unforgiven warships and drop forces, the Despoiler watched it all play out. And as he did, he thought back to the day he and Vashtorr had first held council on the Vengeful Spirit's stratagem chamber. Before battle was joined, he raked over that exchange one more time, probed for faults, sought any hint of trickery in the Arkifane's words. Vashtorr prowled into the stratagem. The eroded pillar stolen from the Iron Angel's reclusium was borne before him by the mass of biomechanical limbs that had once been its suspenser field generator. Abaddon followed. He signaled to Falcus Kyber to secure the chamber's doors and guard them from without. Kyber radiated distrust of the demon, yet knew better than to question his orders. Abaddon was gratified as the heavy stratagem doors boomed shut behind him, sealing him in with Vashtorr. He would show no weakness or worry to this entity. Let it test him if it dared, within the heart of his flagship and at the height of his powers. It would regret the decision. Abaddon was confident of that, But Vashtorr did not launch some ill-judged attack. Instead, the demon bade the pillar-bearer clamber up onto the marble dais that served the stratagem as a table. Then he turned to face Abaddon. His voice rumbled from the room's vox emitters, even as it whispered up from the static in Abaddon's own gorget vox. "You seek the mechanism by which true victory assured be. Is not this true?" Abaddon sneered. "You already know what I want, Arkifane. The galaxy will burn, but I shall not burn with it. I am no nihilist. I want the corpse emperor toppled from his shattered throne. I want to grind his realm beneath my heel. I want conquest, and then rule. None of that will happen if the galaxy slips into madness, or is torn apart by beasts and aliens before my killing blow can fall." "And so, the weapon," said Vashtorr, his lantern eyes burning. "But before the weapon, the key." Abaddon glared at Vashtorr, waiting for the demon to elaborate. Vashtorr harumphed with a sound like gears grinding flesh, seemingly disgruntled by the War Master's silence, then spoke again. "Long before the forebears of your race squirmed amidst primordial ooze, a war there was between entities you would think gods." "I know of the great game and the gods that play it," snarled Abaddon. "I am not their pawn. I want nothing of any weapon they control." Vashtorr waved the objection aside. "Different gods these were. Pantheons bound to the realm of mortal things that had wrought their own divinity. On one side, they who are named the Old Ones. On the other, the parasite gods of Void and Star. Furore they raised across the void, dread powers they unleashed, such even that they, with their mantles of omnipotence, comprehended not. Fire they yoked, never believing it would burn them." Determined not to gratify the demon by showing how intrigued he was, Abaddon merely crooked an eyebrow. Within his chest, though, his heart beat quicker. Such power was precisely what he sought. Long and long raged their conflict. Heavy was its price. One after one they toppled, and lesser minds crawled in their wake. Craven, desperate, they saw not the power of their vanished master's devices, but only the terror of what such technologies had wrought. That which they could not break apart or unmake, the fearful sealed away in realms neither empiric nor corporeal. The vault they locked, the key they sundered. "And you know where this vault lies? How to unlock it?" asked Abaddon. "Hidden lies the vault from even my sight," said Vashtorr. "But fashion we the key, and it shall find for us its lock. For is not the singular longing of all tools to be used as their purpose dictates?" "Come to the point, demon," said Abaddon, gesturing at the pillar atop the dais. "What do you want of me? And what has that lump of stone to do with any of this?" Three were the worlds to which these ancient servants bound the crucial mechanisms of the key, hoping there forever to imprison them, answered Vashtorr. "One world has long since rotted, and Plague Heart was unleashed. Another became empty and desolate, and all its jailers long dead and turned to dust. The Tashuka escaped, for it needed to be used. And the third world, to whose essence the Ouroboros was bound, the third was shattered by a betrayal most gratifying. For that world's name, Great Despoiler, was Caliban. Caliban? The home world of the Dark Angels? Explain." And so Vashtorr told all that he knew, of secrets of bitterness and betrayal, of the hidden tragedy of the Dark Angels and the origins of the Fallen. Some of it Abaddon had known, or else had guessed. Other elements fascinated and delighted him. Yet as Vashtorr finished his account, the Despoiler wondered aloud. "A pleasing diversion, demon. But what has the demise of Caliban to do with our purpose? You give me fragments. Show me the whole, or be gone." Vashtorr gave a vox blurt that could have indicated irritation or approval. "Look upon the pillar with eyes that knowledge opens, the figure atop it all robed and winged, a time-worn blade in hand. Yet the sea of souls ripped Caliban apart. It scattered not just the fallen, but also many fragments of the world whence they hailed. Broken statuary, weapons, devices, fragments of masonry or armor or pottery. Even broken chunks of the world's sundered bedrock, bound into each a portion of the culture, the essence, the very soul of a world and its people. Through them, the Ouroboros." "Bring enough of them back together, and you conjure this Ouroboros?" breathed Abaddon. "Better yet," replied the demon, and something in the timbre of his projected voice conveyed cruel amusement. "To bring it as a whole, the key requires a housing, something saturated with the stuff of the warp, something broken that I may rebuild in the image of my choosing." "Caliban," said the Despoiler, feeling a cold smile twist his lips. "What greater slight to their fool's honour can there be? Caliban shall rise again as wormwood, and at its heart the dissonance engine. Together shall they form the key, whose power is to bore through the space between the Empyrean and the corporeal." "You speak of the webway?" asked Abaddon in surprise. "One of the great tunneling engines it once was. Now a thing of gouging and ruin shall I make of it. Like a worm that is a god, shall it chew through the spaces between, until at last it finds the lock into which it fits." Abaddon laughed then, unable to help himself at the thought of the devastation such a weapon would wreak upon his foes, even before it unlocked the true weapon. "Perhaps we can make a bargain after all," he said. Vashtorr's eyes glowed bright with approval and unholy eagerness, and the dark bargaining began in earnest. "No," Abaddon thought as the vengeful spirit accelerated to attack speed. The Arkifane was like no demon he had ever dealt with. A being of the warp, yet one also of orderly, almost obsessive frankness and pragmatism. There was no trickery in this bargain. They had only to prevail in this last crucial battle, and it would be honored. "All stations! Prepare to engage the loyalist filth!" spat Abaddon, his voice vox-amplified across the bridge. "Leave the Arkifane and his Aurak myriad to claim the final prize. Our task this day is slaughter. Wormwood thirsts. Let us offer it a libation fit to fill oceans." Even as his deck crew cheered and snarled dark oaths, Abaddon could not restrain a mirthless chuckle. The blood of the unforgiven would resurrect more than just the dark animus of wormwood. "Send the command to the planet's surface," he ordered Kyber. "Let the summoning ritual commence. The corpse worshippers have no idea what comes for them this day." The damned world. Wormwood's surface comprised vast expanses of jagged bedrock, bound together over churning strata of infernal machinery that vanished down towards the world's core. City-sized pistons slammed back and forth. Cyclopean cogs ground rivers of flesh. What was one moment a rocky plateau with a commanding view might plummet the next into a valley wreathed in boiling steam and sparks. It was a nightmare battleground filled with terrible hazards. Wormwood pulsed with energies that fouled Vox and Auspex, or caused them to overload in showers of sparks. Its atmosphere was thick with smog storms, through which demonic auroras rippled like oils shimmering on water. Still, the Unforgiven were able to pinpoint the areas of greatest energy output and whatever passed for settlements on the demon world's surface, in part thanks to the information provided by the rock's ancient Calibanite cartogeographs. Driven though they were by a fury bordering on supernatural compulsion, the Dark Angels and their allies were still amongst the most disciplined and strategically gifted warriors in the Imperium. As their warships blasted a path through the biochemical defense platforms and mutated voidcraft choking the planet's orbit, the Council of Masters used their scant intelligence to formulate a plan of attack. Individual strike forces were assigned to designated hot zones on the demon world's largest continental megastructure. Supported by those air assets not already committed to defensive dogfights, these forces would, upon landing, look to inflict maximum damage to key enemy assets across that continent. Strategic doctrine prioritized the destruction of any site or mechanism that looked to be linked to planetary defense or power transmission. The hope was that, with each such victory, the Unforgiven would widen a clear orbital zone above the primary continent. While this effort was underway, their fleet would fight to hold back the incoming traitor warships and keep the orbital exclusion zone free from on high. The moment their zone was cleared, the rock itself would settle into geosynchronous orbit above the target continent and ready Exterminatus-class ordnance, born within its weapon vaults since the days of the Horus Heresy. The Unforgiven ground forces would fight their way back to their drop craft and evacuate, even as the rock struck the killing blow. So would the last uncorrupted shard of Caliban that was cleanse the taint of its chaos-corrupted revenant echo. War Infernal. Hundreds of armoured dropships streaked down through Wormwood's roiling atmosphere as they punched through the miasmal pollutant layers, so the unholy landscape spread out below them in all its grotesquerie. Sprawling forests, whose trees were either dead black skeletons or jagged sculptures of iron wreathed in wire and leaking noxious fumes. Insane city engines, whose brass and steel structures were equal parts industrial hellscape and pollutant-choked fortress. Rivers of glowing molten metal or targ black bubbling slime, tangled transit networks of road and rail that interconnected in impossible ways and constantly reorganized, trapping countless damned mortal souls in never-ending convoys of misery. Rising from cracked ferrous plains and towering over canyons filled with gantries, furnaces and conveyor belts were bastions of twisted Gothic architecture that had the look of imperial cathedra and weapons batteries. Yet these were more diabolical than anything ever fashioned by loyalist hands. Into this dread realm plunged the Unforgiven. A storm of fire rose to meet them. Gargoyle-encrusted weapons batteries swiveled and spat rockets and energy beams at the descending loyalists. Teeming hordes of demon engines, cultists and traitor space marines spilled from within monstrous factory bastions to meet the invaders. Royalist gunships transformed into tumbling fireballs, or spiraled downward with wings shot away and engines belching flames. Squadrons of Unforgiven interceptors peeled off to engage flocks of Helldrakes and other flying demon engines that surged from the eaves of unholy structures. The air came alive with streams of tracer fire as aircraft rolled and spun between mazes of pipes, gantries and smokestacks, trying furiously to shoot one another down. Amidst blistering firestorms, the Unforgiven forces carved out footholds in enemy territory. At a site designated the Dark Cathedrum, iron cloisters and crenellated gantries rang with impacts as drop pods and squads of inceptors slammed down in their enemies' midst. Guns blazing, war cries ringing out over the howl of the foe and the thunder of infernal machinery, warriors of the Angels of Absolution and Blades of Vengeance cleared the way for heavier dropships to land a sizable strike force. Assembling under the banner of Master Modron, they cut a path towards the Dark Cathedral's heart. At other sites, designated by the Loyalists with names such as the Shadow Manufactory, the Unholy Batteries, Voltgeist Mountain, and the Burning Tower, the scene was echoed. Squadrons of land speeders raced low over the bizarre landscapes. Their crews executed daring strafing runs or wove between the pounding pistons and presses of titanic assembly lines. Armoured spearheads and bike-mounted warriors clad in the black of the Raven Wing sped along sinewy roadways and blasted gaps in fortifications lowered in by nests of chains and pulleys to block their advance. The smog-choked shrines of the Archway City rang with gunfire as a mass teleport attack by Consecratus Terminators tore the heart from the enemy's defences. As was their honour and right, Azrael and the cream of the Dark Angels struck at what appeared to be the greatest site of infernal power on the continental megastructure. Designated the Warpforge Palace, it was a city-sized mass of twisted industrial workings and towering fortifications, over which rose a crown-like arrangement of biochemical spines that arced high into the troposphere. The site radiated a singular warp signature, which the Dark Angels Techmarines had described as reminiscent of a teleportarium, yet of a magnitude to dwarf even such ancient and powerful archaeotech. Azrael and his comrades guessed that here, perhaps, was the bound portal from which the many key fragments had emerged after their acquisition by Abaddon's champions. If that were so, then what better place to find the Arkifane himself than at the heart of his ironclad web? And if Vashtorr were not here in person, they reasoned, then surely there could be no better or more valuable site to strike at upon all this damned demon world. Accompanied by many of his chapter's greatest heroes, and leading a combined force of more than 2/3 of the Dark Angel's total strength, Azrael led the attack upon the Warpforge Palace. His hosts of angels made planetfall amidst a belt of roaring demonic forges and gore-filled vats that appeared from orbit more structurally stable than most of the palace's environs. Even as Azrael, Belial, Ezekiel, and Asmodai led their battle brothers down the ramps of their dropcraft, so diversionary strike forces of Angels of Redemption, cowled wardens and blade keepers space marines struck at other locations throughout the Warpforge Palace. Defending hosts erupted from every hatch and archway to meet them, advancing behind tides of writhing tech-spawn and chanting servo-cultists came weaponized servitors, demonic engines, obliterated cots, and dark skitari, as well as renegade space marines hailing from multiple degenerate warbands. Bolt fire echoed between tendon-strung gantries and spike-studded towers. Plasma blasts screamed and massive explosions roared like beasts as Vox Howlers vomited audial barrages of scrap code and cogs and pistons thundered ever on. It was a bedlam war, a conflict no less a warrior than a space marine could have fought in and long remained sane. Yet fight on the Unforgiven did, cutting through their enemies with cold-eyed and murderous ferocity. Resolved in his purpose, Azrael led his forces north and east in a relentless advance. Their Auspex, Vox, and even many warriors' auto-sensors were crippled by scrap code and warpgeists. Yet even this did not cause the Dark Angel's onslaught to falter. Each warrior knew his role in the wider strategy, and through a mixture of amplified shouts and sign language battle cant, the Dark Angels maintained tactical efficiency. Beneath the shadows of the fortress's twisted spines, which curled over the site in a manner that reminded Azrael of a dead arachnid's legs, they blasted a path through every foe that came at them. When a string of flame-belching towers rose from below to block the Dark Angel's advance, tank fire and heavy weapons ruptured them and opened the way. When the indentured demon prince, Parallaxese, led a host of demons and tech mutants in a flanking charge, fresh dropships swept in low and disgorged the Raven Wing to counterstrike. Many riders roared off the ramps of their craft and into the fight from a good 20 feet up. When the palace reconfigured itself around the advancing Dark Angels into a lethal kill box of artillery positions and bunkers, the Loyalists' implacable resolve and supreme fire discipline saw them fight their way out of the trap and leave thousands of slain foes in their wake, though at bloody cost. Many nightmarish hours after first setting foot on the demon world, Azrael and his comrades at last reached the heart of the Warpforge Palace. There, in a wide plaza of Calibanite ruins and industrial machinery, beneath the distant tips of the arachnoid spines, they were confronted with a horror quite different to anything they had expected to meet. Onslaught. In the void, the Unforgiven found themselves hard-pressed as Abaddon and Vashtorr led heretic armadas on the attack. The Despoiler engaged the Unforgiven, contesting Wormwood's orbital zones, seeking to board enemy vessels wherever possible in search of sacrificial captives. Meanwhile, Vashtorr's Bale fleet made straight for the battle group of warships protecting the rock. Yet even as these void conflicts raged, warp signatures warned of fresh fleets converging on the idolatras system. It seemed the odds were about to become even worse for the Unforgiven. The altar. The structures in this place appeared ancient, their architecture uncomfortably familiar to Azrael, yet infested with parasitic biomechanoid technology and industrial grotesquerie. Gangling crane armatures and portals of iron, cable and flesh hinted that this was indeed the site through which the key fragments had been ferried. Yet all such mechanisms were now overshadowed by a huge brass shrine studded with skulls, whose central altar rose atop the highest tower in the complex. At a glance, Azrael took in the cornate icons supporting blazing braziers that rose over the site, the rivers of gore running along channels from dozens of secondary altars, and the masses of cornate cultists, world-eaters, and even knights of Traitor House Bazkar packing every stair and roadway. All howled praise to the Blood God and chanted the words of some dark ritual. Many stood over heaped and headless corpses, offered up in praise. Here was a source of empiric power that the Dark Angels had sought, but it was not Vashtor's sanctum, nor even a valuable defense target to be destroyed. Instead, it was a vast summoning circle, even now vomiting shock waves of rage and hate, as red-robed priests performed their final sacrifices upon their brazen altar. Before Azrael could draw breath to order an attack, the chanting reached a crescendo. The high altar detonated with tremendous force. The explosion of warp flame obliterated the red-robed priests, the altar itself, and the top 8 levels of the tower. From within that titanic blast, flames and darkness coiled into a titanic monstrosity that surged forth. Angron, the Red Angel, was made manifest, and his followers roared with redoubled bloodlust as they turned upon the invading Dark Angels. Azrael saw the demon Primarch take to the air and bear down upon his strike force. For the first time since their attack had begun, the Supreme Grandmaster's resolution faltered, replaced by dread, darkness and blood. Even as war raged on the surface of Wormwood, so the battle in the void became ever more savage. Abaddon's millennia of strategic experience had helped him to swiftly gain a sense of the Unforgiven battle plan and how best to counter it. He and the Vengeful Spirit had led a swift strike against the Loyalist warships, attempting to clear their orbital exclusion zone. Some of Abaddon's fleet dove in close to subject their foes to blistering broadsides and vicious boarding actions, while other heretic squadrons remained outside of the orbital battleground, trapping the Loyalists between themselves and the world below, and subjecting them to relentless pinpoint lance fire. Left to oversee the orbital conflict, Grandmaster Nakir of the Consecrators did all he could to meet the Despoiler's tactics, but the Unforgiven vessels were caught between Wormwood's defenses and the guns of the heretic fleet, even as the cream of the Black Legion blasted their way aboard one vessel after another to fight blood-drenched boarding actions. The Sanctimonium, the Binding Oath, and the venerable battle barge Champion of Valor were all destroyed in a matter of minutes. Abaddon and Falcus Kyber led a teleport assault onto the Ravenwing flagship Implacable Justice, and, though the Despoiler was disappointed not to find its master still present, they overran its defenders, spiked its warp drive, then sent the scuttled vessel tumbling into the Loyalist fleet. Its empiric detonation annihilated several more Loyalist warships. When more than 20 fresh warp translation signatures bloomed dangerously deep into the idolatrous system, Grandmaster Nakir at first steeled himself for word of more heretics incoming. Even when Loyalist coral beacons were detected and the ships identified as belonging to the Blood Angels and the Navis Imperialis, he commanded the data interrogated for signs of trickery. The Unforgiven had kept their crusade a secret, so how could Imperial reinforcements have found them or known of their peril? Yet there was no trickery and no mistake. Grandmaster Nakir frowned over his Auspex screens as he watched the contact runes form up and begin their approach. The Imperial warships really had arrived to join the fight. The questions in Nakir's mind were how and why. From the bridge of the strike cruiser Absolution's Ire, Commander Dante watched screens of his own. An appalled silence shrouded the warship's bridge as the Blood Angels and their cruisers saw Vashtorr's demon world for the first time. Falling back on rigorous training, Helot officers gathered Auspex data that revealed the rapidly worsening position of the Unforgiven fleet. Sharp intakes of breath marked positive identification of the vengeful spirit leading the battle in the demon world's orbit. Servitors croaked reports of the Rock and its picket fleet being engaged in the interplanetary void by an Ark of Omen and its Bale fleet. Commander Dante absorbed each new fragment of information, even as he found himself unable to tear his eyes from the grotesque machine planet silhouetted against the glare of the system's star. He did not know what had driven the Dark Angels and their successors to launch such an all-out attack upon this world, but could well understand their desire to erase it from existence. Here, he knew, was the destination of all the stolen key fragments. Knowing this, he quickly assumed that Azrael and his warriors sought to prevent some dark machination from reaching its conclusion. Commander Dante ordered the attack. He had not borne the Lion himself through the raging warp only to sit back and watch the Primarch's gene sons be destroyed. Indeed, he would have valued El Johnson's strategic guidance, yet to his surprise, no one aboard had seen the Lion or his knights since the Absolution's Ire had translated in system. Realizing the mysterious Primarch must have departed by his shadowy path to be about the Emperor's work, Dante proceeded with his own plan. The Dark Angel's commander had gathered a flotilla of Imperial Navy vessels to his banner en route to the Somnian Stars, as well as a formation of Astra Militarum troop ships thrown off course and separated from their Crusade fleet. These auxiliaries he now sent to reinforce the defense fleet around the Rock, judging that to send unaugmented mortals to fight on the demon world would simply consign them to madness and death. His own Blood Angels fleet he led straight towards a desperate orbital battle. Blood Angels Vox officers swiftly made contact with their Unforgiven counterparts. The responses they received were cagey and stiff. Feeling as though his news deserved a more auspicious moment, Dante nonetheless patched himself through to the inner fleet Vox and told the Unforgiven that he had the singular honor of reporting that their Primarch had returned, seemingly from beyond the veil of death. Moreover, the Primarch and his knights had ridden aboard the Absolution's Ire to join this very battle. Any bitterness Dante felt at making this announcement he kept to himself, for it was not the fault of the Dark Angels that Sanguinius would never return to his sons as the Lion now did. All the Blood Angels' gene sire would ever be to his sons was an echo of nobility, of madness in their veins. Dante's announcement caused shocked silence to fall across the unforgiven Voxnet for almost a full minute. Then came a storm of questions and oaths, through which Grandmaster Nakir's voice cut like a knife. If Commander Dante's claims were true, he said, then he and his fellows would owe the Blood Angels a debt they could never repay. Doubtless, the Sons of the Lion would have many questions, not least how El Johnson came to be aboard a Blood Angel ship, instead of having been reunited directly with his own Gene sons. However, for now, swift martial action was needed, and all other matters could wait. Grandmaster Nakir ordered an immediate strategic X-load shunted from the unforgiven capital ship to the Blood Angels fleet. He asked their immediate aid in stabilizing the situation, both in the void and on the planet below. Finally, he requested that Commander Dante allow him to speak directly to his returned Gene sire. Dante responded that the Blood Angels would aid the Lion's sons in every way they could, but that El Johnson himself had already departed his vessel by means unknown. When and where he would make himself known to his Gene sons was unclear, but it would surely be soon. The Red Angel. On Wormwood's surface, the Unforgiven fought on. With their Vox channels drowned in scrap code, they had no way to know all that transpired in orbit, and so they simply kept fighting, hoping their victories and sacrifices would be enough. So it was at the Warpforge Palace. Angron's ferocious charge had driven Azrael and his forces back in a welter of blood, fire, and bodies. A desperate rearguard action by the Deathwing and the best of the chapter's librarians had held back the onslaught long enough for Azrael to pull his main force back into a string of Gothic structures. There he hoped they might weather the heretic storm. The cost had been terrible. Great numbers of the Deathwing and librarians had been slain, while Master Belial had been borne away in retreat, mangled by Angron's axe, spine grinder, and barely breathing. Successive attacks by the World Eaters and the monstrous Primarch had been repelled by the Dark Angel's massed firepower and fierce counter-assaults, though the cost in lives was grievous. Each time, Azrael had been forced to pull his warriors back, retreating deeper into the industrial ruins and bringing down avalanches of masonry, ironwork, sparking cables and molten metal to cover their retreat. Angron was an unstoppable terror, and it seemed only a matter of time before the encircled and besieged Dark Angels would have nothing left to retreat to. Now Azrael watched from a shattered window arch as Angron stomped back and forth, working his World Eaters up into a killing frenzy for their next charge. The Supreme Grandmaster cursed bitterly. He loathed himself for succumbing to the madness and anger that had filled him upon seeing Caliban's memory so defiled. He hated just as vehemently the demon who had so cynically lured the Dark Angels into battle with the Lord of the World Eaters. Azrael's brooding was disturbed by cries of surprise from his battle brothers, occupying nearby defensive positions amidst the ruins. He followed their pointing fingers, his gaze rising skyward, to behold the golden host descending on wings of fire. The Supreme Grandmaster was no adherent to the Imperial Creed, yet in that moment he half believed some miraculous manifestation was upon them. Yet he registered the flames of jump packs and the red-hulled gunships that streaked down amidst the descending warriors. Somehow, the Blood Angels had arrived to join the fight. Shock and horror warred in Azrael's breast with a surge of exhilaration. Every instinct screamed that what transpired here must be hidden from fellow Adeptus Astartes most of all. Yet Azrael had lost many warriors this day, and the sudden arrival of reinforcements filled him with the fierce hope of vengeance suddenly within his grasp. As the Blood Angels plunged into the battle with guns blazing, the World Eaters raised a demonic howl of challenge. Azrael barked orders to his surviving warriors. They would counterattack now and catch the foe between them with their newly arrived allies. Together, they might yet secure victory. Azrael and his warriors burst from the ruined structures like knights launching a last charge from their crumbling keep. With black-clad bikes and speeders to the fore, and tanks in green and bone-white rumbling in support, battle brothers from every circle stormed forward as one. Ahead, over twisted rooftops and between tangled pipes, they could see the Blood Angels plunging into the rear ranks of the foe. Azrael's post-human sight allowed him to pick out Commander Dante, soaring down in the vanguard to secure the ruined tower atop which Angron had been summoned. Hundreds of Blood Angels fanned out around his position, landing by drop pod, jump pack, gunship or tank transporter. They went about demonstrating why their chapter's reputation for shock assault was rightly earned. Though he could not establish Vox contact with his Blood Angel's counterpart, Azrael understood Dante's plan well enough. With one loyalist force to their rear, and another just now charging out to meet them from the front, the Cornate horde wavered amidst a ferocious crossfire. Bands of World Eaters stormed on to answer the Dark Angel's charge, with chain axes howling. Blood-mad cultists were cut down by bolt fire as they vacillated between following their masters into battle or turning back to vent their fury on the new enemy to their rear. Cornate formations slammed together and became entangled, gore-drenched berserkers cursing and snarling as they hacked at erstwhile allies to clear themselves a path. Chaos Knights trampled cultists underfoot as they loped like hunting hounds through the press. Without fresh attack waves to sustain it, the charge against the Dark Angels faltered, even as the Blood Angels reaped a heavy toll. "Blood for the Blood God!" Angron's battle cry was loud enough to crack armor glass and burst eardrums. Wings beating with thunderous booms, he took to the air and streaked towards the Blood Angels. A Thunderhawk lander tried to bank aside from his path, but it was hacked in half. It and the two Baal predators it had carried plummeted to the ground with meteoric force. Blood Angel support troops, who had taken up firing positions in the ruined tower, focused fire upon the demon Primarch, so that he vanished amidst a blaze of explosions, lasbolts, and plasma blasts. Wings tattered, body bloodied and blazing, Angron swept through the barrage and slammed through the side of the tower into the Blood Angel's midst. He spitted several Blood Brothers upon the blade Samniarius, before bisecting more with a swing of Spine Grinder. A savage whirl saw yet more Blood Angels smashed from their feet and thrown out through the sundered flank of the tower. Angron wheeled and charged up the broad, spiral stair inside the tower, making for the Blood Angel's commander somewhere above. Wreathed in fire and a shimmering supernatural mist of gore, he burst out onto the blasted tower top. The destruction of the brass altar had left the structure hollow and blackened, open to the churning skies and scattered with rubble and corpses. "Skulls for the Skull Throne!" The Red Angel's battle cry was met by another that came in answer. "For Sanguinius and the Emperor!" Borne on wings of fire, Commander Dante and his sanguinary guard fell upon Angron from every side. Nor were they alone. More red-armored battle brothers jetted onto the tower to hit the demon Primarch from all angles, while up the steps behind him came a pair of Blood Angels' Redemptor dreadnoughts, with their guns blazing. Dante had laid his trap swiftly and well, and even Angron staggered upon the onslaught. Vengeful Spirit. Seeing the Blood Angels' fleet inbound, Abaddon ordered his warships to disengage from the beleaguered Unforgiven. This was not a retreat, but rather a tactical relocation to superior positions, a chance to reorder formations before diving in to attack again. Abaddon had no intention of letting his fleet be encircled, as he had trapped the Unforgiven just hours before. The maneuver meant ceding orbital control to his foes, and cleared the way for the Blood Angels to commence what Abaddon saw as their all-too-predictable planetary invasion drop. He was content for them to do so. Wormwood was an engine of death, a device that would chew up every loyalist that attacked it and spit them out as mangled meat. Besides, Abaddon reasoned, every Space Marine attacking Wormwood meant one fewer standing between Vashtorr and the real prize. And when the key awoke, every Imperial lapdog on the surface of Wormwood would be just another sacrifice to be devoured. Vashtorr's prize. Deep in the void, Imperial Navy warships thundered in to reinforce the picket fleet around the rock. Vashtorr felt irked at their arrival. When components of reality meshed with his designs in unexpected ways, there was always an irritating sense of dissonance. Watching from the bridge of the Aurak Myriad, the allies rushing to the aid of the Unforgiven registered on his consciousness like a wavering engine note or flickering amber warning rune whose source he could not trace. He considered that something greater might be at work, a powerful tremor moving behind the veil of reality. In such an infinite galaxy, teeming with powerful entities, such a thing was certainly possible. But, he reasoned, the best way to counteract any unforeseen factor was to conclude his own designs as swiftly and efficiently as possible. At Vashtorr's unspoken command, his Baal fleet drew into a tight formation and burned hard towards the rock with every gun firing. The brute force maneuver scattered the enemy picket ships and saw several surprised and overwhelmed. Yet it also placed the Aurak Myriad and its escorts in an untenable position, surrounded and firmly in range of a sizable Imperial fleet, as well as the rock's own titanic batteries. Vashtorr heard his enemy's confusion and stolen vox snatches, jarring with the blind faith that suffused his own followers' transmissions. Wary or rapturous, many on both sides believed that his seemingly suicidal battle plan must hide something far more cunning. In a way, Vashtorr thought with cruel amusement, they were right. As his ark neared the rock, Vashtorr marshaled his full cogitational intellect, a supernatural logic engine more powerful than worlds' worth of cogitators. He correlated, cross-referenced and triangulated every scrap of data that he and his followers had gathered during his invasion of the Dark Angel's Fortress Monastery. He overlaid it onto his visual field, manifesting an empiric schematic of the rock whose dimensions and complexity would have driven even the greatest tech-priest of Mars swiftly mad. Data revelation bloomed through Vashtorr's consciousness. Following its glowing gossamer threads, he sent tendrils of his animus questing across the void and through the tiny flickering distortions in the rock's force field. His mind quested inward, racing along data conduits and cables, copper nematodes burrowing through solid stone and metal to exuding fresh wires where no connections existed. The Arkifane ignored the shuddering of the Aurak Myriad as it was pounded with fire, the cries of dismay from Baal fleet captains as their ships foundered and died, the blaring of alarms and tolling of warning bells as his spiritual intrusion onto the rock was detected. He drove deeper and deeper to where he knew, by an infinitely complex process of cogitational elimination and logical analysis, his prize must lie. A single wire emerged from the wall of a gloomy and stifling chamber near the heart of the rock. It spouted optic lenses like glowing red buds. Through them, Vashtorr beheld a mass of ancient machinery that squatted at the chamber's heart like an inmate in a cell. Weird energies danced through the device's core. A desiccated human corpse stood beside it. A puppet, propped up by the machine on thick cables, it watched Vashtorr's intrusion with the appearance of mild interest. Empiric carrier waves bore Vashtorr's offer to the ancient alien processing cores of the Tuhulcha engine. Be no more the captive of frightened primitives. Serve your function. Let me reunite you at last with the Plague Heart and the Ouroboros. The thing in the chamber spoke a single word, through lips dry and tattered as parchment. Yes. The Arkifane and the time-lost fragment of Old One's machinery exchanged more meaning then, a blisteringly fast two-way traffic of questions and answers, enlightenment and instruction and understanding. At its end, swirling energies billowed through the chamber, while also entangling with Vashtorr's corporeal self and wreathing him too. An instant later, even as the alarm sirens of the Aurak myriad howled out a death dirge of betrayal and despair, both the Tuhulcha engine and Vashtorr vanished into another realm entirely. Supreme Grand Master Azrael fought his way forward through a screaming press of heretics. The sky above was a churning storm of burning petrochemical clouds and blistering dogfights. Gunfire, clashing blades, and bellowed oaths blended into a deafening cacophony. Azrael's armor was drenched in gore, as was the bone-white plate of the Terminators and Blade Guard who fought at his side. Corpses crunched and squelched under their every advancing footfall. Guns thundering, fists and blades swinging, the Deathwing hurled back the cultist mobs and butchered them to the last man and woman. Azrael led his warriors up a wide metal ramp riveted together with bone. Pistons strung with pumping muscles formed a wall to one side, while to the other the ramp dropped away towards a valley of iron and crumbling stone, where loyalists and heretics battled furiously amidst ever-churning machines. Azrael's instinct was to turn and aid his battle brothers, but with Vox and Auspex useless, he had to reach high ground to regain clarity on the wider strategic situation. Striding over a carpet of the broken dead, Azrael crested the ramp and marched out onto a wide open platform. He ignored the blood-wet clots of machinery that jutted from the platform's surface, and the yellow eyes set into their dripping flanks that swiveled to follow his advance. Moving to the platform's edge, where a nest of rusted gantries and stairways led back down to the street level below, he stared out across the heaving turmoil of the battle. On the right flank, Samael and his Ravenwing had cut deep into the foe's lines and encircled a swathe of tech mutants and cornate renegades near the foot of a clockwork edifice. The swift Space Marines were even now culling their victims mercilessly. The left flank, by comparison, had developed into a ferocious firefight, as Dark Angel's armor met stalking Chaos Knights amidst crumbling Gothic towers and thundering engines of iron and bone. Ahead, Azrael could see red-armored figures battling one another furiously as the Blood Angels and the World Eaters clashed in dozens of separate conflicts. The curled spines of the Warpforged Palace loomed overhead, looking more arachnid and menacing than ever. For all the dark grandeur of this spectacle, Azrael's attention was drawn to the ruined top of the high tower. Now less than a quarter of a mile ahead, where the elite of the Blood Angels fought Angron. The fury of that fight had blown out walls and sent avalanches of masonry raining down into the streets around the tower. Angron and his enemies now battled in full view between the surreal remnants of interior walls, columns, and denuded stairways. Corpses clad in red or gold armor were scattered everywhere. Azrael wished for a moment that his vision was not so keen, for it showed in inescapable detail the catastrophic wounds that had reduced once proud warriors to so much mangled metal and meat. Some bodies even dangled from lengths of twisted rebar that jutted from the walls, impaled with tremendous force and left to hang like trophies. A Redemptor dreadnought sprawled, burned and broken against a shattered column. Rich red blood coated every surface and drooled in clotted ropes down the tower's walls. Angron was himself torn and blooded, his armor buckled, greasy smoke boiling from the flames that licked at his wings. Yet where he had butchered almost all of his attackers, their efforts to banish him had not even slowed the Red Angel. Angron fought like a bloody whirlwind, wheeling, hacking, stomping and roaring, as he sought to slaughter the last of the warriors who opposed him. Even as Azrael watched in dismay, the demon Primarch's axe ripped through Commander Dante's personal banner-bearer and hurled the bifurcated sanguinary guard across the tower. Fresh blood soaked into the fallen standard where it lay. Desperate to aid the Blood Angels, appalled at the price they had paid in their attempt to aid his warriors, Azrael raised Lion's Wrath and opened fire upon Angron. The Deathwing needed no order to follow his lead. A fusillade of fire split the air between the platform and the tower top, deadly accurate despite the range. Angron roared in fury as he was peppered with rounds, some of which ripped through his corporeal form in gouts of molten gore. As the demon Primarch whirled towards his new attackers, a golden-armored figure rocketed from up top a broken stairway and swung his glowing axe at Angron. Fast as fury, the demon Primarch spun, ignoring the Dark Angel's firestorm as he parried Commander Dante's attack. A shockwave exploded out as Spinegrinder met the axe mortalis. Angron staggered back from the exchange. Dante, by comparison, was smashed from the air and into the stone steps hard enough to crack them. He lay still and did not rise. Azrael cried out in dismay as Angron threw back his head and roared his triumph. The Blood Angel's chapter master lay defenseless before him, open to the killing blow. Yet as Azrael watched powerless, shadows suddenly coiled around the Red Angel and his victim. Tendrils of mist obscured the figures, and from amidst the vapors spread incongruous green shoots of what looked to Azrael like plant life. Shifting shapes unfurled, resembling nothing so much as a sketch of a dream of half-remembered trees, their dense boughs more shadow than substance. In the next instant, Azrael's bewilderment gave way to awe. A tall figure in a flowing cloak stepped from the mists to place himself between Angron and Dante. Space Marines in black armor manifested around him and spread out down the steps, but Azrael barely noticed them. He could only stare at the warrior with the glowing blade and glinting shield. It did not matter that Azrael had only seen him before in tapestries, frescoes, and stained glass. His very blood knew this warrior's identity. His gene seeds sang with the truth. Teetering as close to being overwhelmed as it was possible for a Space Marine to come, Azrael went to one knee. He was looking at the Lion, returned to his gene sons at the hour of their greatest need. Some part of Azrael squirmed with dread, for the Primarch had also returned in time to witness the sins of the unforgiven writ large. His mind whirled with self-recriminatory images: the rock defiled by invasion, Luther's escape, the horrors unleashed by the Chehulka engine. Yet even these memories could not undermine the surge of raw vitality and exaltation that galvanized Azrael at the sight of the Lion alive and returned. The battle brothers of the Deathwing bellowed amazed oaths, as word spread from one band of Dark Angels to the next. The survivors of the strike force surged into their foes with redoubled zeal. Atop the tower, even Angron had paused to glare at his former brother. Yet the spell was broken as the Red Angel howled and launched himself at the Lion. Their mighty blades clashed again and again, sparks raining from each impact. The sword, Samniarius, struck the Lion's shield and rebounded in a concussive pulse of light and force. Several of the black-armored Space Marines who accompanied the Lion lunged to take advantage of the opening in the Demon Primarch's guard, and only now did Azrael register with disquiet their resemblance to warriors of the Fallen. Angron swept Spinegrinder in a roaring arc, and bloodied corpses scattered away from him. Azrael saw the Lion bark an order, and suddenly the black-armored warriors melted away down the tower steps towards the battle below. The Lion now backed away from his foe, and Angron stormed after him. Azrael realized that this was no retreat, but rather an attempt to draw Angron away from the fallen Dante. Back and forth across the tower top the two demigods battled, Angron raining a constant storm of blows upon his foe, while the Lion demonstrated sublime martial skill in fending off or evading every strike. Flames and roiling mist whirled about the two combatants, tattering apart each time another shock wave burst from the Lion's shield. Azrael was torn away from the spectacle as a hail of bolt shells whipped up from below to ricochet from the Deathwing Terminator's formidable armor. Vox-amplified howls rose, warning of a fresh band of World Eaters storming up the gantries from street level to assault Azrael's position. He realized he had been entranced by his Genesire's arrival, but that there was a battle to be fought in the here and now. But even as he rose and let fly into the foes climbing up from below, Azrael could not deny himself a last glance at the tower top. He was in time to see the Lion backing towards the edge of the tower, trading blows with Angron, but still fighting defensively, as though to goad his berserk opponent. Between one blade swing and the next, El Johnson looked directly at Azrael, and their eyes locked. The sensation of his Primarch's regard hit Azrael like a physical blow. Fire seemed to race through his veins. No words could they exchange. Yet in that moment, the Supreme Grand Master knew precisely what his Genesire wished of him. El Johnson was risking himself to draw the rampaging demon Primarch away, not only from his own scions, but from the Blood Angels also. That left Commander Dante and any others of his honor guard who might still cling to life, lying wounded amidst the ruins. There was a blood debt here, a matter of honor and duty that the Dark Angels could not ignore. Azrael had his quest from his liege lord, and he would see it completed. Whatever came after, he would deal with it if he lived that long. The Lion leapt from the tower top and vanished from sight. Roaring his hate, Angron lunged in pursuit. Brandishing the Sword of Secrets, Azrael stepped forth to meet his own onrushing foes. "For the Lion!" he bellowed. His war cry was taken up by the Deathwing, and then by the Dark Angels fighting in the Warpforged Palace. Soon the air rang with their shouts, even over the thunder of battle and the endless churning of the planet's infernal machines. "For the Lion! And the Emperor!" Gods and Demons. Near Wormwood's core, in an empiric sanctum beyond the reach of mortals, the Arkifane employed all his dark genius to combine the Ouroboros, the Plague Heart, and the Tuhulka engine, and fuse them irrevocably into his demon world. As he fashioned his dissonance engine, so it began to thrum like a dark heart, and Wormwood quickened around it. When the Unforgiven launched their assault upon the Arkifane's demon world, the battlefield it presented had been a nightmare of relentless industrial motion. Such unnatural perils were as nothing to the churning violence that now racked the planet from its core outwards, however. Gargantuan cogs clattered into new alignments and accelerated with sparking ferocity until the vast change they hauled upon became a blur. Damned souls wailed in hideous cacophony as they were vomited from city-sized hoppers into colossal furnaces that burned them up by the billion. Plumes of sulphurous pollutants and eruptions of greasy flame burst from canyon-like vents ringing with gnashing fangs, jetting up into space like titanic solar flares. Arcs of green and purple lightning crackled through the heavens, forming unholy runes and hideous visages as they leapt between metallic mountain tops. Entire battlefields rumbled skywards. Others rotated apart or plunged into fume-wreathed pits, killing or trapping countless warriors as the planet's unnatural continents reconfigured themselves with frenetic violence. From space, the demon world resembled an immense mechanical puzzle, shifting through infinite complexities as its mysteries were unlocked by the hands of some invisible god. Weird, energetic auroras danced through the planet's infernosphere, chased by leaping firestorms and cyclonic masses of pollutant filth. Loyalist auspicators, previously drowned in muttering static, now awoke, and at one began to scream their alarm at the unnatural energy signatures radiating from the heart of the planet. Shipboard servitors twitched and burned as they tried to analyze those readings. Auspex adepts reeled back from their consoles in horror, wailing of impossible signatures spiring off the charts, even as unholy runes rose like wheels across their flesh and their minds collapsed into madness. A collective shudder of horror rippled through the Loyalist forces battling on and around Wormwood. Meanwhile, aboard the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, Abaddon the Despoiler permitted himself a cold and victorious smile. He did not need to communicate with Vashtorr to understand the import of what he was seeing. The Arkifane had constructed his dissonance engine. Wormwood, the long-desired key, was complete, and was awakening to its full power. Whatever the Loyalists did now, it was too late. Abaddon and Vashtorr had won. The duel. You are nothing but a skull to be cast before the blood god's throne. You are meat to be bled for his glory. Now fight me and die, so I can get on with butchering your miserable sons. Angron, Demon Primarch of the World Eaters, to Lion El Johnson. The Warpforge Palace heaved with obscene life. Sinewy, gore-wet flesh surged from grates and valves, strung through with sparkling wires, glowing eye lenses, and gnashing metal fangs. Roadways cracked down their middles, then yawned open like mile-long trapdoors, spilling battling warriors and vehicles down into furnace pits, where cogs gnashed and piston-driven crushers pulverized metal, flesh, and souls. High overhead, the arachnoid spines creaked into motion. Their tips curled down and inward, like the mandibles of a vast insectile maw. Gunships and flying demon engines were smashed from the air by the descending masses of metal and muscle. Shadows pooled about doomed combatants who looked up in despair before they were crushed. Through it all battled Angron and the Lion. El Johnson was disgusted by his former brother's hideous form, contemptuous of the monster Angron had made of himself. Yet he did not underestimate the supernatural might the dark apotheosis had granted the demon Primarch. The Lion fought with every iota of skill he possessed, channeling all the lessons he had ever learned about combating wild and warp-tainted beasts. For his part, Angron felt little beyond the furious pounding of the butcher's nails. He dimly recognized the Lion, but El Johnson was just another foe to be slain. An eternity of unending rage and hate had blunted the Red Angel's capacity to revile one enemy more than any other. Angron would take his once brother's head for corn, just as he had taken those of so many of the Lion's gene sons already this day. The two demigods fought their way across a mechanical plateau where piston columns pounded maniacally and jets of white-hot flame erupted from hidden apertures. Angron sought to lop El Johnson's head from his shoulders, but felt he was there to block the blow. Samniarius rebounded against the Emperor's shield, and as the shock wave drove Angron back, the Lion seized the chance to duck around a pummeling row of pistons and gain some space. Angron dropped his head and bullied straight through the slabs of machinery. He bellowed as he wrenched aside sparking mechanisms and hacked apart steel-braided sinew, only to recoil as the Lion smashed the Emperor's shield into his face. El Johnson retreated again, a strategy cohering in his mind as he clattered down a spiraling brass stairway. He was gaining a sense of his foe. Angron was a devastatingly powerful and unrelenting enemy, but the Lion thought he knew how he might defeat his former brother. His train of thought was disrupted as the stairway gave a violent lurch. Looking up, El Johnson saw Angron had taken to the air, letting his weapons dangle from the chain manacles as he grasped the stairway's superstructure, then wrenched the entire edifice away from the side of the mechanical plateau. With an oath, the Lion leapt clear as the spiral stair buckled under its weight and collapsed. He dropped, cloak rippling behind him, and landed atop the roof of a Gothic ruin. Despite the tumorous masses of biotechnology that grew from it, El Johnson felt a horrible sense of familiarity as he glanced around the crumbling rooftop, and saw the hooded statues that dotted it. He did not know precisely what the structure had been, but he recognized the architectural style of Caliban before Imperial compliance. The Lion had no time for bitter reflection. Angron fell upon him like a roaring thunderbolt, spat from skies of dancing flame. The Primarch's weapons clashed and clashed again, as the Lion gave ground before his enemy's brutal onslaught. Lost to rage, Angron might have been, but hardwired instinct, coupled with the dark gifts of his patron god, lent him tremendous martial skill. Unleashing a flurry of blows upon the Lion, he forced open a gap in his opponent's guard, before landing a kick to El Johnson's chest that cracked his armor and threw him through a statue with punishing force. Sensing what was coming next, El Johnson kept rolling even as Angron's axe slammed into the rooftop where he had been a split second before. Reaching the roof's edge, the Lion threw himself out into thin air and dropped onto a tilted metal platform some 30 feet below. He rolled with the impact and came up in a guard stance, shooting a quick look at his surroundings as he did so. The sight that greeted him was a surreal one. This region of the Warpforged Palace appeared to have contorted atop vast unseen gimbals, so that what had been a flat plain of riveted metal plates had now become a treacherous landscape of steeply angled ramps. Crackling energy pylons thrust skyward from between the crooked plates. It looked as though loyalist and heretic war engines had been dueling here before. The cataclysmic awakening of the planet began. Dark Angels and World Eater battle tanks lay helpless where they had been hurled onto their roofs, or blazed where they had smashed together or had slid into contact with the lightning-wreathed pylons. More tanks and a handful of staggering Chaos Knights were still mobile. Some crews looked to be falling back, trying to maneuver their vehicles onto more stable ground. Others, prizing hatred or vengeance even over life, fought on as best they could, even as their war engines slid inexorably towards oblivion. Angron swooped from atop the Gothic ruin and fell upon the Lion again. This time, El Johnson was prepared. Dropping to one knee, he raised the Emperor's shield and caught the full force of Angron's meteoric descent upon it. Golden energy erupted in a tremendous shockwave, and the Red Angel was hurled to smash down amidst the precariously battling war engines. If the Lion had expected a moment's respite from this gambit, he was disappointed. Angron rose with an incensed howl and hurled World Eater's predator towards the Lion with an underhand swing of his axe. Seeing the improbable projectile coming, El Johnson dove aside. However, he was not quick enough to avoid the next tank, a Dark Angel's impulsor, that Angron sent slamming and bouncing end over end in his direction. The vehicle hit the Lion and smashed him back into the wall of the Gothic ruin, hard enough to crater the stonework. Angron howled and charged, beating his wings to give himself more impetus. Bloodied and in pain, but knowing that he had moments to act, the Lion heaved aside the crumbling wreck of the impulsor and leapt atop it. He spared a moment's thought for his Gene sons slain within the ruined vehicle, and anger smouldered within him. Angron leapt to strike, and the Lion dove aside, leaping away from the wreck and hammering the Emperor's shield into the back of Angron's skull as he went. Propelled forward by the blow, the Red Angel smashed headlong into the ruin and was buried in an avalanche of rubble as the wall came down upon him. El Johnson backed swiftly away, limping slightly, dimly aware of tanks still dueling around him, even as he kept his attention on the rubble heap. He knew Angron could not be so easily defeated, but he hoped at least to have wounded his former brother. If nothing else, the ignominy of being buried alive would have stoked Angron's fury to new heights, something the Lion was counting on. The rubble heap erupted. Flaming chunks of masonry rocketed through the air, several striking tanks with the force of wrecking balls. Angron came at the Lion in a red blur, eyes blazing hate, weapons swinging wildly. So sudden and ferocious was the assault that even El Johnson could not react in time. He managed to bring the Emperor's shield up between himself and Angron, but the angle was poor, and the titanic discharge of energy threw him backwards as violently as his foe. The ground fell away beneath the lion as he tumbled back, then down, into the fume-wreathed gulfs beneath the tilted platforms. Angron bellowed a war cry and plunged after him again. Shifting tides. With the destruction of the Aurak Myriad, the remaining ships of its Bale fleet found themselves disastrously outmatched. Already more than half their number were blasted wrecks. Now the remainder were forced to choose between desperate flight or the fanatical desire to take as many foes with them as they could. More than a few heretic vessels chose the latter course. Overloaded warp drives and headlong ramming maneuvers claimed several loyalist warships, even at the moment of their victory. Yet, as the Rock ploughed through the wreckage field with battle barges, strike cruisers, and Imperial Navy warships in formation around it, the blitzing loyalist firestorm put pay to any heretic warships not already fled. Piling on speed, the Rock and its escorts powered towards the demon world. They aimed to reinforce the beleaguered Unforgiven and Blood Angel ships still fighting in its orbit. Survival. By the time they reached the tower top, Azrael and his Deathwing had linked up with a force of 2nd Company Blood Angels under Captain Aphael, also rushing to their chaptermaster's side. They found only Commander Dante and 4 of his Sangari guards still alive. The commander himself was conscious, but badly hurt, able to limp along in his buckled armor with some aid. One of his Sangari guard was in a similar condition, while the remaining 3 had fallen into healing comas. Commander Dante brimmed with dark fury at the horrors wrought upon his warriors, controlling his wrath through an obvious effort of will. Azrael sought words of gratitude and consolation, but they sounded hollow amidst the scene of butchery. Some gene seed could at least be recovered from the slain by the Sangari priests, and what relics and war gear could be salvaged were swiftly gathered up. The blood-drenched banner of the Sangari Guard Dante himself reclaimed, raising it aloft and leaning upon it for support. A swift council of war took place atop the tower as the skies crackled and boiled overhead. The landscape writhed and the sound of battle and anarchy rose up from below. There were those, Aphael chief amongst them, who wanted to revenge themselves on the heretic hosts, but Azrael and Dante counseled against it, though it was clear the latter wished nothing more than to tear every foe on the planet limb from limb. The madness that had possessed Azrael and his fellow Dark Angels seemed to have abated with the appearance of their Primarch. The mere presence of the lion acted as a spiritual balm. Freed from the grip of goaded rage, Azrael saw clearly that his ground forces could achieve nothing more. They had done all they could do to clear a path for the Rock to unleash its ordnance upon the demon world, and now risked being consumed by the planet's anarchic quickening. As a small mercy, that transformation seemed to have altered the atmospheric energy spectra so that, while they were still choked with, static and horribly unreliable, both Vox and Auspex had returned to some semblance of functionality. The news they brought was dire. All across the continent, Unforgiven forces had been scattered by the churning mechanical landscape, and many were now fighting simply to survive. The same was true of the Blood Angels, who had reinforced them only to find themselves embroiled in a waking nightmare. The only saving grace was that the heretic force seemed just as shocked by the sudden change, and had been hit every bit as hard. Fighting a coherent campaign was no longer viable for either side amidst the unholy anarchy consuming the world. Entrusting the final stages of the planned exterminatus to Grand Master Nakir, Azrael and Dante now focused on extracting their surviving warriors. This would not be easy, however. With the landscape churning madly and the air fouled with demon engines and jets of unholy energies, it was tremendously risky for the Space Marine gunships to land and pick them up. However, after a swift and frustratingly broken exchange with Grandmaster Nakir, who was still in the thick of the Void War, Azrael and Dante agreed a plan. Orbital augury revealed 3 comparatively stable zones still remaining on the continent, each several miles across and located at the epicenters of networks of empiric ley lines. There were other such zones dotted roughly equidistant all across the planet's surface, which suggested some significance or functionality to them. But for now, they presented the best extraction sites remaining. Orders flashed through the laboring Vox networks. Bloody strike forces swung into action. Those warriors closest to the stable zones would do all they could to secure and defend them, aided by squadrons of gunships and interceptors. Meanwhile, the more distant Dark Angel and Blood Angel forces were ordered simply to reach the extraction zones by whatever means necessary. From there, gunships and dropcraft laden with survivors would attempt the perilous flight up through the boiling atmosphere and dare the fury of the Void War to dock with their parent vessels. It was a desperate plan, with an alarming number of variables that could go horribly wrong. Moreover, while the Loyalists had no way of knowing why the demon world churned with such a violent change, the spiraling energy levels suggested some cataclysm drawing closer by the moment. It seemed clear that time was of the essence. At such a moment, unaugmented human soldiers might have fallen prey to madness and despair. Space Marines, however, were psychologically incapable of countenancing defeat. Instead, Azrael, Dante, and their warriors shouldered their burdens, reloaded their weapons whilst muttering catechisms of hate, then descended the tower and plunged back into the fight still raging below. The Cornate forces in the Warpforged Palace were already on the verge of defeat. Their strength had been eroded over successive attacks upon Azrael's defensive positions, and then sorely culled when the Blood Angels launched their counterstrike. Now facing the resurgent Dark Angels, and bereft of the brute guidance of their demonic Primarch, they had lost all direction. The Angels of Death drove the dregs of their foes into gnashing mechanical chasms and lakes of molten metal, or annihilated them with withering crossfires. Though the immediate battle was over quickly, it still cost Loyalist lives. The Butcher's Bill only continued to rise as the Warpforged Palace writhed around their Loyalists. Eruptions of infernal flame and the sudden heaving of metal and stone claiming more warriors. Azrael and Dante ordered their surviving forces to form up and make for the nearest extraction point with all possible haste. They would have to fight their way out of the Warpforged Palace, then through the cog-churned nightmare of industrial insanity and undead forests beyond, but they were determined to make it to safety. Supreme Grandmaster Azrael had sworn a silent oath to his returned Primarch to ensure that the Lord of the Blood Angels escaped this world alive. As for the Lion, Azrael did not know where he or his mysterious companions had gone, but knew with the conviction of absolute faith that El Johnson had not returned only to vanish again so swiftly. The Primarch would be with them. He would not perish along with the demon world when the rock smote it from on high. The Angel and the Beast. The Lion battled Angron through Stygian industrial depths. They dueled amid strata of grinding machinery and writhing muscle, dancing lightning and roaring balefires. The closer one drew to the core of wormwood, the further one slid through the veil between real space and the warp, so that soon empiric currents flowed between the two battling demigods. Where Angron's weapons struck home, they manifested fiery blasts of hate to scorch the Lion's skin. Where El Johnson flowed around his berserk foe's attacks, his cunning became writhing tendrils of mist and smouldering shadow groves that confounded the Red Angel. Diminutive robed figures peered from between the ghostly trees here and there, but at Angron's approach they vanished back into the shadows. The dueling foes entered the region of demonic furnaces and biomechanoid assembly lines, where tormented souls were being bound into runic blades and firearms. Hissing overseers watched the fight warily. Their sinew whips coiled as though wishing to lash out and taste the demigod's blood. Onwards battled Angron and the Lion, ploughing through curtains of flayed skin and out onto a wide circular plain of steel, whose surface flowed into screaming faces and clawing hands. El Johnson staved off another ferocious onslaught by Angron, parrying aside a decapitating strike and deflecting spine grinder with the Emperor's shield. Then came a waterfall roar of discharging steam and a vertiginous lurch as the battlefield, in truth, the top of a titanic piston, hurtled up and up. As poison-hued daylight returned, the lion ran and threw himself clear of the piston's top before it could plunge into the depths again. Back on the demon world's surface, El Johnson now found himself amidst a maze of pipes and heaving, fleshy mounds whose translucent skin revealed glowing wires and toothy maws within. These grotesque hillocks belched vari-coloured warp smog in such vast quantities that the air was thick with it, and visibility reduced to a matter of feet, even for those with a Primarch's natural senses. The lion could hear more of the colossal pistons hissing and banging up and down nearby. From somewhere overhead came the monotonous whump of huge turbine blades, though they did nothing to clear the omnipresent miasma. The clangor of battle was just barely audible. It echoed weirdly through the smog from afar. The lion smiled mirthlessly, for here was the perfect environment for the culmination of his strategy. He faded into the smog an instant ahead of Angron, who howled with fury to find his opponent vanished. The Red Angel was by now apoplectic. Though incapable of feeling fatigue, Angron was not accustomed to the mounting frustration of fighting one opponent for so long while they maintained a relentless defensive stance. He had claimed no skulls and shed only the merest drop of blood for what felt like an eternity. The insistent pounding of the butcher's nails suffused his being with white-hot agony. His capacity for reason had been drowned in molten fury and pain. To find his foe vanished then was near unbearable. Angron could scent the lion's potent biology and the lapping powders of his armor. He could hear the Primarch's heartbeats, his footfalls, the servo whine of his battle plate. He glimpsed the furnace-like beacon of El Johnson's soul burning in his warp sight, yet the phantasmic smog occluded even Angron's demonic senses. The lion, for his part, had less trouble keeping track of a foe that roared and snarled oaths and imprecations with every heaving breath. Angron hacked at half-imagined geists and bellowed with rage. In response, the lion surged suddenly from the flank and struck with the Emperor's shield, sending Angron recoiling into the air with wings beating. The demon Primarch lunged, but El Johnson was gone again into the fumes. Angron thundered after his prey. Again the lion evaded, struck and faded back from his enemy's lightning-fast counterattack. In his mind he fought monsters again in the mist-wreathed Calibanite forest. The few times Angron landed a blow, the Emperor's shield was always there to block it and send the demon Primarch reeling back. All the while Angron's rage mounted, until it danced across his body as a spectral flame. His muscles and eyes bulged as though he might literally burst from the anger swelling within him. Then came a piston, rushing up from the depths and discharging steam as it slammed to a halt at its apogee. For a moment, it blasted aside the veil of smog. The lion was revealed in the act of slipping around Angron's flank for yet another goading strike. There was no thought, only the primal urge to kill, as Angron beat his wings and hurled himself at the lion like a living avalanche. He swung his weapons in wide arcs as he came, aiming to scissor them through El Johnson's neck in a move no shield could possibly block. Yet this time, the lion made no effort to defend. With blistering speed, he instead dropped to one knee, braced his blade with his whole body, and let Angron slam straight into its rising point. The demon Primarch's own impetus drove the glowing blade up through his torso, until it erupted from the nape of his neck in a fountain of gore. Borne on by the force of Angron's charge, the two demigons rolled and bounced through the fumes. Angron came to rest on his back, one wing pinged under him, his corporeal form unable to re-knit its calamitous wound, with fealty still transfixing it. The Red Angel thrashed and howled. One clawed hand dug into his wounded sternum in search of the blade's ichor-slick grip. The lion loomed over Angron, armor bloodied and dented. He gripped the Emperor's shield with both hands and gave Angron no time to react. With a roar, Lion El Johnson brought the glowing edge of his shield down upon the demon Primarch's head, driving it through the bridge of Angron's nose with such force that it embedded itself in the metal surface beneath. Angron's corporeal form detonated like a tank round whose propellant was distilled hate, blasting his animus apart with such a tremendous force of released rage that even the demon Primarch's indomitable will could not draw it back together. El Johnson was thrown clear of the blast and came back up with his cloak smouldering and his cracked armor scorched. Breathing hard, his body racked with the pain of countless wounds sustained while battling Angron, he limped back to the blood-streaked crater in which Fealty lay. As he recovered his blade, the lion felt certain he would see his former brother again, likely sooner than he might hope. For now, though, Angron was banished. The lion sighed and shook his head. He tuned his armor's vox bead to the Dark Angel's command channel and listened intently. Hefting blade and shield, the Primarch set off south towards the nearest extraction site. As he limped along, he considered his deeds this day, his choice of his gene sons over the wider galaxy. He had so much to tell them, so much to do. It was time to rejoin his unforgiven sons and to begin the work of ensuring his sacrifices had not been in vain. Betrayed. Many mortal worshippers of Vashtorr had descended to Wormwood to garrison its fortifications. As the planet convulsed around them, those unfortunates realized their demigod had deemed them expendable once his machine was completed. Though some embraced what they saw as the divine gift of being consumed by the demon world, many others fought to escape the surface before calamity overcame them. Extraction. Elsewhere upon the tormented continent, Azrael, Dante, and the surviving warriors were drawing near to their own extraction zone. They had fought through one nightmarish landscape after another to reach that point. Scattered bands of renegades and manifesting hosts of demons had taken their toll upon the retreating space marines, as had the sudden and violent shifts of the landscape. Twice, ignoring direct orders, valiant gunship pilots had brought their craft down in an attempt to airlift the chapter masters and their accompanying heroes to safety. On the first occasion, an immense tentacle of braided cable and muscle rose up from a nearby chasm to swat the gunships from the sky with the casual cruelty of child-killing insects. The second attempt was aborted when airborne demon engines screamed in low to engage the descending Space Marine craft in a dogfight. The battling machine spiraled back into the polluted skies and was soon lost to sight. Soldering on across mechanical land masses that heaved with reconfiguration and burned with strange energies, the Space Marines plunged into a belt of metallic woodland and bubbling petrochemical lakes. They could now see the distant flares of ramjets that marked loyalist gunships lifting off from the designated extraction point and punching skywards. Azrael exchanged brief vox messages with the defenders up ahead, establishing through howling static that they were under attack from scattered bands of renegades and heretic tech priests who appeared to want to hijack their drop craft to escape the churning world. Azrael was mid-sentence when the ground beneath his feet gave a titanic heave. Metal trees toppled with awful screeches and petrochemical filth spewed from ruptured lakes as blocky metallic shapes rose up all around the Space Marines. The structures resembled huge bunkers or freight elevators, atop which squatted ironclad artillery guns. They were crewed by cackling and cadaverous horrors whose bodies meshed with their rusted weapons. Even as the cannons belched smoke and clattered to life, fanged blast doors yawned in the flanks of the bunkers to disgorge miasmal vapors. From amidst them shambled hordes of plague demons. The Dark Angels and Blood Angels had been fighting non-stop for many hours. Most were wounded, and their weapons and war gear were heavily battle-damaged. Ammunition was critically low. Nevertheless, despite being ambushed, outflanked, and outnumbered, they responded with speed and determination. Squads folded back into interlocking battle lines and guarded the flanks of their armored vehicles. Ezekiel led the surviving librarians to unleash their powers against the demons, blasting many back into the warp with crackling skeins of empiric energy. Azrael took command of the Strike Force's combined heavy fire assets, directing tanks, devastators, and hellblasters to return fire upon the infernal artillery. Meanwhile, Dante and Master Samael led the assault elements of their combined forces to hurl back the first waves of flopping beasts and thrumming plague drones. Rust-furred demon engines clattered forward on piston-driven legs, several making straight for the Deathwing warriors still bearing along the gravely injured Master Belial. Before the infernal machines could reach their victims, Commander Dante and a band of Blood Angels barred their path and unleashed a furious storm of fire. Dante himself blasted a glowing tunnel through one of the engines with his perdition pistol, causing it to stagger backwards, then collapse, as stinking ichor jetted from its ruptured form. Bloody endings. Even as conflict raged in the idolatras system, the void battles in the sacrilem and apostra systems were spiraling towards their own savage conclusions. After a ferocious duel that saw the mutual destruction of both the Emperor's Children flagship, Bounty of Agonies, and the Cowled Warden's battle barge, Night of Flames, the remaining renegades in the sacrilem system were scattered and put to flight. Amidst the dust nebulae of the apostra system, however, it was the worshippers of the Dark Gods who gained a decisive upper hand. After a formation of Death Guard warships absorbed the initial fury of the Unforgiven surprise attack, the Black Legion of Wordbearers ships encircled their foes and systematically picked them apart. Thus, while one loyalist ambush fleet plunged back into the warp en route to the idolatrous system, the other was already picked over and looted by rapacious traitor legionaries. On the surface, swift Vox exchanges made it clear that, with heretic forces still pressing on the extraction zone, no reinforcements could be freed to aid Azrael and Dante's force. Master Samael instead launched a breakout attempt at the head of his surviving Raven Wing, seeking to punch through to the extraction zone and open a gap through which the rest of the strike force could fight their way clear. His charge was met by a hugely bloated Great Unclean One, a pallid monster named Ugablax, whose rotten flesh oozed pollutants and was studded with smog-belching vents and pipes. This demon lord had labored long in servitude to the Soul Forgers, and now saw a chance to pay off its debt to Vashtorr with an offering of slain Space Marine lords. As it lumbered forward, so the petrochemical slicks around Ugablax spread and rose into a reeking tide that engulfed the onrushing Dark Angels' bikes and skimmers. Mired in filth, the Ravenwing fought for their lives as fresh waves of demons rose dark and dripping from the ooze to attack. Azrael cast about for some way to fight clear of this insidious snare. The Lion had only just returned to his Gene Sons. He had given Azrael a duty to fulfill. It could not end like this. Amidst bubbling filth and fly-thickened fumes, a fetid demonic herald hurled itself at Azrael, and he met it blade to blade, snarling curses into its festering face. Suddenly the entity's head exploded, smashed to ruin by a black power fist. Azrael recognized the weapon's wielder as one of those who had arrived with the Lion. He was a roguish-looking warrior, with an eye patch riveted into his flesh. Looking around, the Supreme Grandmaster saw an entire warband of black-armored Space Marines had joined the fight, though he had no idea how they had moved up so suddenly and unnoticed. The warriors' armor was battered, their weapons thick with gore. Clearly, they had been fighting their own battle since arriving on this world. Azrael wanted to know where and why. Indeed, he had many questions for these warriors, who felt to him so much like fallen. But Ugablex loomed over him at the head of a heaving mass of plague demons. It was clear there was no time. The warrior with the eye patch grabbed Azrael's shoulder guard and urged him to lead his forces to the extraction point. The Risen, he said, would hold the demon back, for they had debts to pay. Azrael almost threw off the warrior's hand and struck him, driven by instinctive disgust. Yet the Space Marine's next word stayed his hand. "Duty is its own reward, Supreme Grandmaster," he reminded us. "He expects no less of you." At a commanding cry from one of his followers, the warrior turned away to rejoin the fight. Deep and visceral suspicion still seethed in Azrael's breast, but he had seen these Space Marines arrive with the Lion and do his bidding, and he did not doubt their loyalty to the Primarch. As the black-armored warriors hurled themselves at the great Unclean One and its demons, Azrael seized the opening that they created. He ordered Samael to press the attack and break through the demons' lines at any cost. As Urgablax reeled under the assault of the warriors in black, its demons surged inward like a tide, rushing to aid their master. Meeting them head-on and punching through their lines, the Dark Angels and Blood Angels exploded out of the ambush that had trapped them, gaining momentum. The surface of the planet shook furiously underfoot. Geysers of warp flame roared up into the heavens beyond the horizon. Scattered packs of demons still lurched through the thickets of wire and steel trees, but they were not enough to halt the angels of death when their salvation was so close at hand. Looking back, Azrael was in time to see the great Unclean One writhing under the furious onslaught of the warriors in black. Many of their number had fallen beneath the talons and spewing filth of their foes, but still there remained a fort on. Then came a thunderous volley from the demon artillery positions, firing wild into the midst of the fight. Both demons and black-armored warriors vanished beneath clouds of smoke and fire. Azrael felt deeply conflicted as he and his forces burst from the forest's fringes and onto the metal plain of the extraction zone. Scattered bands of renegades turned at their approach and fought back with desperate ferocity. Caught as they were between the zone's defenders and the newly arriving Dark Angels and Blood Angels, they did not last long. Passing heaped wreckage and blast-riddled bodies, Azrael led his survivors to the dropships waiting beyond. His and Dante's force was the last to fall back to this position, and as they mounted their craft, so the defenders collapsed their cordon and joined them. The landscape heaved on all sides. The skies were aflame with racing auroras and arcs of lightning. It might already be too late to escape, Azrael thought, but the attempt had to be made. He had a duty to the Lion and meant to see it done. He hoped that, whatever else happened, his forces had done enough to allow the rock to strike the killing blow. The key awakens. The minutes that followed saw Azrael both relieved and bitterly disappointed. Under the direction of Grand Master Nakir, and with aid of the rock and its attending fleet, Abaddon's warships had been driven back from the planet's orbital engagement zone. Though the flight was still littered with perils, and though almost a third of all extraction craft had been annihilated while fighting their way out of the planet's orbit, this was enough to allow hundreds of Unforgiven and Blood Angels to escape the demon world. As Azrael's gunship streaked up into the void, he heard the voice of the Lion himself rumbling across the fleet-wide Vox. To remain within proximity of the demon world, the Primarch said, was to risk annihilation, for no conventional mortal weapon could now destroy what the heretics had awakened. All the Loyalists would achieve by remaining was their own deaths. El Johnson ordered all ships to form up on the rock and perform a fighting withdrawal. Great haste was to be made, for time was all but up. The horror here could not be prevented. However, the Angels of Death would live to fight another day and overcome the machinations of traitor and demon alike. None amongst the Loyalist shipmasters had the authority nor will to gainsay a Primarch. Thus, even as the demon world convulsed beneath them, the Dark Angels, Blood Angels, and Navis Imperialis vessels gathered up the last of the fleeing drop craft, then burned hard for the deep interplanetary void. They were intent only on putting distance between themselves and Vashtorr's unnatural world. Abaddon felt a mixture of triumph and bitterness as he watched them go. On the one hand, his moment of victory had arrived. The Loyalists were fleeing, and he had exacted a colossal butcher's bill upon them. Scores of broken wrecks tumbled through the void, or had been reduced to slowly expanding debris clouds. Between the void battles and the surface war, shocking numbers of Loyalist Space Marines had been slain. The Unforgiven chapters might never regain the strength that they had possessed before this day, On the other hand, Abaddon still felt victory was incomplete, especially in light of the news that Lion El Johnson had stepped from ancient history to rejoin the long war. The Despoiler could not help but wonder, in light of Guilliman's indomitous crusade, what impact a second loyalist Primarch would have upon the wider strategic picture. Yet for all that, victory was indisputably his, and Vashtorr's, he conceded to himself, as the Arkifane's voice crackled from vox emitters throughout the vengeful spirit. Sounding uncharacteristically gleeful, the demon recommended Abaddon withdraw his fleet to a safe distance. The key had awoken. The dissonance engine was ready. Wormwood lived, and the realm of real space would never be the same again. Now, the hunt for the lock could begin in earnest, and then the weapon. Abaddon ordered his fleet to pull back, as the insane energy readings emanating from Wormwood spiraled into ranges no mortal device could measure. He watched with fascination as the planet's infernal radiance grew brighter and brighter. It was time to see what their key could do. Interrogator Mace strode into the chambers of Lord Inquisitor Cotes. Her heart thumped from her run through the fortress's corridors. The brass massive tube was a cold weight in her grip. Cotes looked up from a desk buried beneath data slates and vellum. Star maps plastered the wall behind him, busy with annotations pertaining to Bale fleets and the bloody conflicts they had triggered. His cyber eagle hunched atop a bookcase, one head glaring balefully at Mace. "Agent Dalgier's report. Idolatrous system," she panted. The Inquisitor held out a hand, and she thumped the tube into its palm. Cotes broke the tube seal before sliding it into a projector device of brass, bone, and glass at the end of his desk. A twitch of a control wand dimmed the room's electro-sconces. Cotes then muttered a rite of awakening. The machine clattered to life. It threw a square of grainy light onto one of the chamber's walls, while sound hissed from a vox phone on the projector's flank. The image was blurry, but quickly settled to show a man's face, with the suggestion of a dimly lit chamber behind him. Mace recognized the blunt features and bionic eye of Agent Dalgier, but she had never seen the redoubtable Mordian look so frightened. "My Lord Inquisitor," he began, voice crackling with static, image glitching slightly. "I remain embedded within the bridge crew of the Paladin. Mistress Veronica read the tarot true. This vessel was amongst a naval formation consolidated into the Blood Angel's fleet en route to the idolatrous system. Lord, the events that have transpired here, even with my training." Mace watched Dalgier struggle visibly for words. "You will find a full account of the conflict that has taken place here, data linked to this missive. Suffice to say, Lord, the heretics prevailed. We are even now in full retreat and approaching the system's Mandeville Point." Dalgier shot a nervy look over his shoulder, then continued. "You were right, Lord. Your reading of the signs. The so-called Knight of Annihilus, the Primarch El Johnson, is returned. Again. A full report is linked to this missive, locked with your 57th cipher. The Lion is aboard the Rock, and even now preparing to depart the system." A second loyalist Primarch, risen from history. Mace felt faint. She wished she could sit down while she processed this revelation. She remained standing, however, knowing her Lord Inquisitor would not approve. She wondered if she had mistaken Dalgier's expression, seeing fear where instead there was awe. His next words banished that hope. I wish that were the only monstrous event I had to report, Lord. But there is more, and it is terrible. Even the lion's return could not halt our enemy's plans. I cannot speak to the veracity of the rumors included in my full report, the whispers of an ancient world resurrected from the Dark Angel's past. What I can swear upon my faith in the Golden Throne, however, is this. Our foes have created a technological abomination in planet form. As to its precise nature or purpose, Dalgeir faltered and shook his head. What follows is vivid capture of the moment the demon world unleashed its power. You may make more sense of it than I, Lord. Dalgeir's image was replaced by footage from aboard the bridge of an Imperial warship. Captured, Mace presumed, using Dalgeir's optic augmetic. A hubbub of voices accompanied the footage, the reports, exchanges, prayers, and binary blurts of a bridge crew at work. As Mace watched, Dalgeir's viewpoint swung left and right, taking in the pale faces, hasty movements and bandaged wounds of a bridge crew who had clearly seen hard battle. They hunched over their consoles while speaking of retreat vectors and projected safe minimum distances. Dalgeir's viewpoint suddenly jerked up to focus on the ship's main vidscreen. As it did, the voices around him rose in alarm. Mace could not suppress a gasp. Even Inquisitor Cotis murmured an oath. There, magnified on the screens, hung the Arkifane's demon world in all its dark magnificence. Discs of phosphor-bright light glared in a geomantic pattern across its surface, linked by lines of vivid green fire. Runic designators and cutaway screens showed where a fleet of heretic warships lurked in the void beyond the glowing planet. They also highlighted where damaged royalist vessels limped frantically away from the world, trailing in the wake of the main Imperial retreat like debris. Part of Mace's subconscious, conditioned to operate autonomously under stress, absorbed this peripheral information. Meanwhile, all her conscious mind could do was recoil in horror from the wrongness of the infernal machine world on the view screens. At the same time, she found herself unable to look away. "Energetic reading spiraling," called a voice from somewhere to Dalgeir's left. "Holy Emperor, these numbers! They don't. How can it?" On the vid screens, the balefires burning across the planet's surface blazed brighter, then brighter still. "Alert! Multispectral analysis indicates massive, non-empiric relativistic trauma to localized space," blared the amplified voice of a tech priest out of shot. "Detecting correlating choristic data points to xenoform subrealm gateway activation, but upon a macrocosmic scale beyond cogitational capacity. It is an impossibility. It is an affront to the Omnisire." Mace watched in appalled fascination as the searing glow of the demon world occluded even the light of the system star. As it did, strange phenomena warped the image on the vid screens. The void around the glowing world buckled and flexed as though being viewed through a fish-eye lens. Space itself rippled, as though it were black cloth snatched and bunched up by the hand of a careless god. Reality distorted around the demon world, then fractured. Interrogator Mace's mind refused to make sense of the sight. From the cries of horror and denial that crackled from the voxophone, she was not alone in this. She could not work out whether the light of the demon world was ripping the fabric of the void, twisting and tearing it like an auger being driven through flesh, or where reality was splitting as tendrils of misty silver energy thrust through from some ghostly void beyond. Plumes of glowing vapor thousands of miles long erupted from the tears in the stuff of real space. The warping, clenching, twisting and tearing of reality around the demon world accelerated until the planet sat at the center of a deepening whirlpool. Mace felt her gorge rise and her senses rebel. She was forced to look away and to throw out a hand to steady herself. Cotis's disapproval be damned. A final, blinding flash drew her unwilling attention back to the projection. She was in time to see the demon world plunging into the whirling abyss it had gouged in the skin of reality. a black orb falling into an infinite ocean of silver light. A swarm of shadowy darts followed it in tight formation. The heretic fleet, Mace realized, led by no less a vessel than their vengeful spirit itself. In their wake was left a semi-visible fissure in reality. Not a warp portal, but instead something more ethereal and regular, yet no less terrifying. Mace's senses were insufficient for the task of truly perceiving this glowing wound, yet she sensed the violation and wrongness of it, even witnessed third hand upon a vid reel. Dalgir's recording ended and his face returned, the image jerky and stuttering as he completed his report. Mace did not take in his words. Even the psycho-conditioned filtration engrams in her mind had been overwhelmed by what she had witnessed. She saw again and again the demon world plummeting forward, outward, down, as it tore its way into a liminal space that nothing should have been able to violate. Mace massaged her temples as her mind ached with the strain of processing input beyond her sensory capabilities. "Interrogator Mace!" barked the Inquisitor, snapping her back to herself. The recording had finished, she realized. The electro sconces burned brightly again. Her master was watching her intently, his expression stony and unreadable. "Lord Inquisitor, what is thy will?" she breathed slowly and deeply. "There is work to be done, Interrogator," he said. "Questions we must answer. Are you fit to serve the God Emperor in this?" "I am, Lord," she asserted. "We must understand what we just witnessed," said Coates. "Xenoform sub-realm gateway activation. That is what the Tech Magus said. If that is so, where are the Eldari in this?" Mace frowned. "You are right, Lord. They have the power of foresight, and a more vested interest in the labyrinthine dimension than any. Why did they not intervene?" She gestured at the projected device, almost helplessly. "Some of their psychic caste came to me in the guise of allies," said Coates, half to himself. "Doubtless they sought to spend human lives in place of their own, so I rejected their entreaties. That cannot have been the limit of their efforts, however. The Eldari are ancient, their methods duplicitous and strange. We must understand their involvement in this, why they have remained aloof, or, if they have not, what prevented their intercession. But more important still, we must learn more of this world engine the Despoiler and the Arkifane have fashioned. What is it? What is its function? And where is it going?" "And the Bale feats, Lord," added Mace. "Many are still at large. Have they served their purpose, or do they still follow some wider pattern we cannot see?" Coates fixed her with a hard stare. "Activate every asset we have," he commanded. "Make contact with the Grey Conclave and our agents within Fleet Septimus. Make no mistake, Interrogator. Our enemies have won a great and terrible victory here. One that we, in our ignorance, cannot yet fully comprehend. We must understand what it is the heretics have created, what they seek to do with it, and we must learn how to counteract it. If we fail, then I fear they will build upon their triumph to the ruin of all the God Emperor's realm."